Hey my dear listener, before we start, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Comment down where are you from and what's your time right now. Let's jump into the video. Story 1. The Mud, the Smoke, and the Hunger. A peasant's week in 14th century England. You wake before the sun. There is no gentle alarm, no clock ticking on a bedside table. Instead, you are stirred by the low shifting of animals and the slow, damp cold pressing through the walls of your house, if you can call it that. You are in rural 14th century England, somewhere in the rolling countryside of England, under the rule of Edward III. And if you think you would survive a week here, you should first understand how your Monday begins. Your house is made of wattle and daub, woven sticks packed with mud, manure, and straw. The roof is thatched, thick but never entirely waterproof. When it rains, it leaks. When the wind blows, it whistles through cracks you have long since stopped noticing. You sleep on a mattress of straw. It rustles when you move, and sometimes it rustles when you do not. Fleas thrive here, so do lice. If you are fortunate, you share your sleeping space only with your spouse and children. If you are less fortunate, a chicken or two may be roosting inside, safe from foxes. The air smells of smoke. The hearth in the center of the room smolders constantly. There is no chimney. Smoke drifts upward and escapes slowly through a hole in the roof. Most of it lingers. Your eyes are used to the sting. Your lungs less so. You rise because you must. It is late summer, perhaps August. Harvest approaches. Every day matters. You are not a landowner. You are a villein bound to the manor. The land you farm does not belong to you. It belongs to your lord, who in turn owes loyalty and military service to greater nobles, all the way up to the king. This is the structure of feudal society. Layered obligations, rarely questioned, deeply entrenched. 3 days a week you work the lord's domain, his personal fields. The other days you tend the narrow strips allocated to your family. The system is known as open field farming. Long, thin strips of land stretch across common fields, separated by low ridges of earth. You do not choose your strips. They are assigned. On this Monday, you owe labor. You eat first, if it can be called that. Breakfast is coarse bread, dark and heavy, made from rye or barley. Wheat is for the wealthy. You dip it in small ale, weak beer brewed at home. Water is unreliable and often unsafe. Even children drink ale. The calories matter. You will burn thousands today. Outside, the village is already stirring. Perhaps you live near a market town not far from York, or perhaps further south within reach of Canterbury. But your world is small. You may never travel more than 10 miles from where you were born. The fields are damp with morning dew. You carry a sickle, its iron blade sharpened carefully. Iron is valuable. Tools are repaired, not replaced. Harvest is communal and relentless. Men, women, and children work side by side. You bend, you cut. You bind sheaves of grain. The rhythm becomes hypnotic: grasp, slice, gather, tie, over and over. Your back aches within the hour. It is not just physical endurance you must manage. It is calculation. You must ensure that the Lord's share is harvested efficiently. Falling behind invites punishment: fines in the manor court, or worse. The manor court meets regularly, recording petty offenses on parchment rolls. Failure to fulfill labor services is noted. There is no anonymity here. Everyone knows your obligations. Around midday, you pause briefly. Lunch is pottage carried in a clay pot, a thick stew of peas, beans, onions, perhaps cabbage. Meat is rare. If you have a pig, it will be slaughtered in late autumn, salted for winter. Fresh meat now would be an extravagance. You eat sitting on the ground. There is little conversation. Energy must be conserved. The sun climbs higher. You notice clouds gathering in the distance. Rain during harvest can be disastrous. Grain must dry properly before storage. A damp harvest invites mold. Ergot fungus can poison entire communities, causing convulsions and hallucinations. You do not know the biology of it, but you know the danger. In the early 14th century, your grandparents may have spoken of the Great Famine of 1315–1317. Weeks of relentless rain destroyed crops, grain rotted in the fields, livestock died, people starved. Some resorted to desperate measures. The memory lingers, passed down in quiet warnings about the sky. You glance upward again. By late afternoon, your hands are blistered. Blisters become calluses. Calluses crack. Infection is always a possibility. There are no antibiotics. A simple wound can fester. You have seen it happen. A cut that turns red, then black, followed by fever and death. You continue working. When the reeve, the Lord's appointed overseer, often a peasant himself, signals the end of the day's labor, relief is muted. You are not finished. You still must tend your own strips. The light is fading as you move to your family's land. The grain here is yours, minus taxes and tithes. 1/10 will go to the church. The priest keeps careful count. The church is ever present. Your village likely falls under the authority of the Catholic Church, centered far away in Rome. You do not question doctrine. Your understanding of the world of illness, whether fortune, is filtered through sermons. God rewards. God punishes. Saints intercede. You work until you can no longer see clearly. When you return home, the smoke greets you again. Supper resembles breakfast: bread, pottage, perhaps a scrap of cheese. If your cow is producing milk, you are fortunate. Many are not. Your children are thin. Most children are. 1 in 3 may not survive to adulthood. Illness moves swiftly through cramped villages. You sit near the hearth. There is no glass in your window, only a shutter. Night closes in completely. Without candles, which are expensive, darkness is absolute. You consider the week ahead. Tomorrow may bring more labor on the Lord's land. Wednesday might be yours. Thursday, perhaps repairing hedges or clearing drainage ditches. Saturday could involve carting grain to the manor barn. Sunday is for mass, even rest is structured. You lie back onto straw that pricks through your thin tunic. Your muscles throb. Your stomach is never entirely full. And yet this is not considered unusual. It is simply life. You might imagine that you would endure through determination, through modern resilience. But resilience here is quiet and uncelebrated. It is rising each morning without certainty that your harvest will sustain you through winter. It is knowing that a bad season could undo everything. As you drift toward uneasy sleep, you might begin to wonder something unsettling. If this is only Monday, if this is merely the first day of a single week, how would you fare when the rain does not stop, when sickness enters your home, or when the Lord demands more than you can physically give? Would you still believe you could survive 7 days? By Wednesday, your body no longer wakes with surprise at the pain. It expects it. The blisters on your palms have hardened into ridges. Your shoulders feel permanently weighted, as if the yoke of the oxen has settled there instead of across their backs. You rise again before dawn, the rhythm of medieval life offering no negotiation. This day, at least in theory, belongs to you. In the manorial system that shapes your existence, you are required to give several days of labor to the Lord's domain. The remaining time is meant for your own subsistence. But your own is a fragile concept. Your strips of land lie scattered among the great open fields. You must work them efficiently because no one else will. Outside, mist rolls across the low ground. The village sits in a shallow fold of land, clustered huts arranged loosely around a narrow path that becomes mud whenever it rains, which is often. Pigs wander freely, snuffling for scraps. They are semi-wild, lean, and practical. A pig is wealth on 4 legs. If disease strikes it, your winter food disappears. You walk to your strips with a wooden plowshare resting near the field's edge. It is a heavy tool, fitted with iron at its cutting tip. The heavy plow, introduced centuries earlier, made northern European soils more productive. But it requires oxen, and oxen require cooperation. Few peasants on a full team. You share animals with neighbors. Today, you and 3 others have agreed to plow a section that will be sown with winter wheat. Timing matters. If you miss the planting window, yields fall. Lower yields mean hunger months later. You guide the oxen slowly, pressing the plow into the earth. The soil turns in long, damp ribbons. It smells rich and organic, but fertility is deceptive. Without modern fertilizers, you depend on manure and crop rotation. The 3-field system governs your survival. 1 field planted in autumn grain, 1 in spring crops like barley or oats, and 1 left fallow to recover. It sounds methodical, it is, but it is also precarious. A single week of excessive rain can compact soil. A single late frost can kill seedlings. You have no insurance, no savings account, no external supply chain. As you work, you think about obligations beyond the Lord. There is the tithe to the church, 1/10 of your produce owed regardless of yield. The parish priest keeps records, sometimes more carefully than the reeve. The church building itself likely stone if your village is prosperous, timber if not dominates the landscape. Its bell dictates time. Matins, mass, vespers. Your week is structured not only by labor but by prayer. You may not be literate. Most peasants are not. Yet you are expected to internalize doctrine, to confess sins, to understand your place in a divinely ordered hierarchy. Kings rule by God's will. Lords command by inherited right. You obey because disobedience risks both earthly punishment and eternal damnation. By mid-morning, the sun breaks through the mist. Sweat trickles down your back despite the cool air. You pause only briefly to drink small ale from a wooden cup. Water from streams carries risks animal waste, decay, unseen contamination. Boiling is not a conscious germ-killing strategy. It is simply tradition embedded in brewing. You glance at your neighbor, Thomas. He limps slightly. Last winter, a cart wheel crushed part of his foot. It healed crooked. There was no surgeon, only the village wise woman who bound it in linen and applied a poultice of comfrey and honey. Infection did not take him. That alone feels like luck. Medical knowledge in your world is a mixture of inherited herbal remedies and ancient theory. The concept of the 4 humors blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile still shapes understanding, drawn from authorities like Galen and filtered through medieval scholarship. You do not know the name Galen, but you know that illness is imbalance, that bleeding may cure fever, and that certain plants soothe wounds. If sickness comes, you endure it, or you do not. By midday, plowing gives way to sowing. Seeds are cast by hand in a practiced arc. You have learned the motion since childhood. Too sparse and land is wasted. Too dense and plants choke each other. All the while you calculate silently. How much grain will remain after tithes, after milling fees? The Lord owns the mill. You are required to grind your grain there and pay for the service. Attempting to use a hand quern secretly can result in fines. The manor court enforces these rules with tedious regularity. It meets every few weeks in a wooden hall. Offenses include failing to repair fences, brewing weak ale, letting animals stray, marrying without permission. Yes, even marriage can require the Lord's consent if it involves leaving the manor. A fee merchant may be imposed. Freedom is a technical term here. You are not enslaved in the ancient sense, but neither are you free to depart. Your identity is bound to this land. If you fled to a chartered town and lived there for a year and a day without being reclaimed, you might gain freedom. But towns are distant and uncertain. Places like London are almost mythical in scale to you, crowded, noisy, filled with opportunity and disease alike. But reaching them requires time, money, and risk. As afternoon stretches on, clouds gather again. This time they do not threaten rain, only shade. You feel a dull satisfaction watching the freshly sown earth lie in orderly furrows. This field represents potential survival. But potential is not security. By late day, you return to the village to repair part of your fence. Hedges mark boundaries loosely, but animals test them constantly. A stray cow can trample seedlings. Responsibility is communal, yet blame is individual. Your wife has spent the day differently but no less laboriously. She tends the kitchen garden cabbage, leeks, perhaps some beans. She spins wool using a drop spindle. Wool is critical. Sheep thrive in English pastures and wool exports drive much of the kingdom's wealth. Merchants in distant ports send English wool to Flanders, where it becomes fine cloth. You will never see those markets, but your labor feeds into them. If you are fortunate, you own a few sheep. Shearing occurs in early summer. The fleece must be cleaned, carded, spun, and eventually woven. Cloth is time-consuming. Every garment represents hundreds of hours of work. Evening approaches. You eat again. Pottage thickened with barley, flavored perhaps with a scrap of salted pork if reserves allow. Your children listen as you speak quietly about the coming days. There are rumors. Travelers passing through rare but memorable have mentioned unrest in parts of the kingdom. Taxes are rising. The king, Edward III, wages war in France. The conflict will later be called the 100 Years' War, though you cannot know its duration yet. War requires money. Money comes from taxation. Poll taxes may be assessed per person, not per landholding. That means even the poorest contribute the same flat rate. The thought unsettles you. Coin is scarce in your world. Most exchange is local and based on goods or labor. If new taxes arrive, how will you pay? Night falls fully. You sit near the hearth, smoke curling toward the roof's dark opening. The sound of wind through thatch is constant, like distant breathing. You reflect on your calculations, grain yields, livestock health, obligations owed, debts avoided. There is no surplus of comfort, only narrow margins of survival. And beneath it all lies uncertainty. You have heard whispers of sickness in distant port ships arriving from abroad carrying strange illnesses. It sounds like rumor, nothing more. Yet trade routes connect even isolated villages indirectly to larger currents of history. You cannot see those currents, you only feel their distant tremors. As you lie down on Wednesday night, muscles trembling from strain, you might begin to sense that survival here is not about dramatic heroism. It is about enduring systems, legal, agricultural, religious, that press upon you daily. If new taxes come, if war intensifies, if harvest fails, how thin can these margins stretch before something breaks? By Sunday, your body moves more slowly, but your week is not lighter. You wake to the same smoke-stained ceiling, the same draft creeping through the wattle walls. Yet this morning is different. There is no plow waiting, no sheaves to bind, no reeve watching. Today is for God. The church bell begins its low, steady toll just after sunrise. The sound rolls across the fields, over hedges and narrow strips of barley and oats. It reaches every hut, every animal pen, every patch of cultivated earth. It is a sound you have heard since infancy. It divides your time more surely than any calendar. You wash your face with cold water from a wooden bucket. Cleanliness in your world is practical rather than ritual. Full bathing is rare, but Sunday demands some effort. Your tunic, though patched, is brushed and shaken free of straw. Your wife ties her hair neatly beneath a simple linen veil. The children are scrubbed as best as possible. You step onto the narrow path that leads toward the parish church. The building itself stands slightly apart from the houses, constructed of rough stone, thick-walled and steady. It may not rival the soaring cathedrals of distant cities like Canterbury, whose cathedral draws pilgrims from across the realm, but to you it is immense. It is permanence. It is authority made visible. Inside, the air is cool and faintly damp. Candles flicker near a painted wooden rood screen. The walls may bear faded images of Saints St. Margaret, St. Nicholas, figures whose stories you know through sermon rather than text. The priest begins the Latin Mass. You do not understand Latin. Most of the congregation does not, but comprehension is not the point. The ritual itself binds the community. You kneel when others kneel. You cross yourself when they do. You listen as scripture is explained in English afterward, the priest reminding you of obedience, humility, and the promise of heavenly reward. Your life is narrow, but heaven is vast. You are reminded that suffering has purpose, that famine and plague are trials sent by God, that rebellion against rightful authority invites divine wrath. You bow your head. After Mass, villagers linger outside. Sunday is also your social world. News travels here. Disputes are whispered about. Marriages are discussed. You learn that old Margaret's cow has stopped giving milk, that John's daughter is betrothed to a man from a neighboring manor, that the manor court next week will hear complaints about damaged hedges. Ordinary details, quiet concerns. Yet beneath the routine, something unsettled hums in the background of your era. You may not sense its full shape, but historians will one day look back at your century as a time of fracture. If this is the late 1340s, rumors grow stronger. Ships have docked in southern ports carrying not only wool and wine but disease. It has traveled trade routes through Europe, across the Mediterranean and into England. In 1348, it will reach the southern coast and begin its silent march inland. It will later be called the Black Death. You do not know that name yet, but perhaps you have heard that entire towns in Italy have emptied, that carts carry bodies, that priests die alongside peasants. You might dismiss it as distant misfortune. England feels insulated, rural, separate. After church, you return home for a slightly better meal than usual. Sunday sometimes allows for small indulgences. If you have eggs, you cook them. If cheese remains from earlier in the week, you share it. There may even be a small portion of salted pork. You sit outside, letting the rare stillness settle into your bones. Children chase one another between huts. A dog barks lazily. The fields stretch golden in the late summer light. For a moment, survival feels possible. And yet survival is always balanced on narrow edges. Consider your average lifespan. If you reach 40, you are considered old. Childbirth is dangerous. Minor injuries can turn fatal. Winter cold penetrates thin walls. Hunger sharpens tempers and weakens bodies. But here is the paradox. Despite all this, you endure. You endure because you know no alternative. You endure because your neighbors endure. You endure because the system, oppressive though it may seem, provides a structure that distributes risk, shared plow teams, communal harvests, collective repair of roads and ditches. And sometimes, unexpectedly, that system shifts. If the plague arrives, it will devastate your village. Perhaps half will die, perhaps more. Priests, reeves, children, mothers, entire households gone. It will be horror, but it will also alter the balance of power. With labor scarce, surviving peasants will find themselves in demand. Lords will struggle to enforce traditional obligations. Wages will rise in towns. Some villeins will leave manors seeking better terms. The rigid bonds of feudalism will begin, slowly, to loosen. Authorities will attempt to clamp down. In 1351, the English crown will issue the Statute of Laborers, trying to freeze wages at pre-plague levels. Enforcement will be uneven. Resentment will simmer. Decades later, in 1381, that resentment will erupt in the Peasants' Revolt, led in part by figures like Wat Tyler. Peasants will march on London, demanding an end to serfdom and oppressive taxation. From your Sunday afternoon vantage point, such upheaval is unimaginable. You are tired, you are hungry, you are bound to your land. And yet history is moving quietly beneath your feet. As evening approaches, the bell tolls again for Vespers. You kneel once more in prayer. Perhaps you pray for a good harvest, for healthy children, for protection from distant rumors of disease. The sky deepens into blue-gray twilight. Smoke rises from every hut as fires are lit. The same smoke that stings your eyes each morning curls gently upward now, softened by dusk. You lie down on your straw mattress for the 7th time this week. You have labored for your Lord. You have tended your own land. You have fulfilled your tithe. You have prayed for deliverance. You have calculated every handful of grain and every ounce of effort. You have survived a week. But survival here is not measured in 7 days. It is measured in seasons, in winters endured, in children raised past infancy, in small shifts of power that take generations to register. From a modern perspective, your life may appear unbearably harsh, smoke-filled, backbreaking, constricted by obligation. And it is. Yet it is also the foundation of a society that will slowly transform. The demographic shock of plague, the pressures of war under kings like Edward III, the strains of taxation and labor shortages, all will contribute to the gradual erosion of the very system that binds you now. You do not know you are living at a hinge point in history. You only know that tomorrow is Monday again. And if the rains come, or the sickness, or the tax collector, if something tips the delicate balance you maintain, would your endurance be enough? Or would the week that felt survivable turn into something far more fragile? Story 2. Bread, Beer, and the Black Death. Life in a plague-stricken town. You live inside walls now. Not the thin wattle of a village hut, but the timber-framed closeness of a medieval town. The year is 1348. The air smells different here, less of open fields and more of humanity compressed. Smoke from hundreds of hearths hangs between buildings that lean toward one another as if conspiring. Waste runs in shallow gutters along narrow streets. You step carefully, but there is only so much care can do. You are in a coastal English town, perhaps not far from Bristol, one of the kingdom's busiest ports, or along the southern shoreline where ships from Gascony and beyond dock with wine, cloth, and grain. Trade is the town's lifeblood. And trade, though you do not yet realize it, is also its vulnerability. You wake in a rented room above a baker's shop. The heat from ovens below rises through warped floorboards. It is warmer than the countryside, but not cleaner. The room is shared with your spouse and 2 children. The walls are daubed, cracked, and occasionally alive with movement. Rats are ordinary here. They slip between grain sacks in storehouses. They nest in thatch and timber beams. They gnaw quietly at night. No one considers them remarkable. They are simply part of urban life, as common as fleas and mud. You descend the narrow staircase to begin your work. Perhaps you are a journeyman baker, rising before dawn to knead coarse dough made from rye and maslin. Wheat flour is reserved for those who can pay more. Bread is regulated by law. Assizes fix its weight and price according to the cost of grain. If loaves are too light, you risk fines or public punishment. The town's officials check regularly. Or perhaps you are a cooper, hammering iron hoops around barrels destined for export. Or a fishmonger, salting herring to preserve it for inland markets. Whatever your trade, it ties you to the pulse of commerce. Commerce depends on ships. And ships have been arriving. Weeks ago, rumors traveled ahead of them. Tales from ports in southern Europe of entire neighborhoods falling silent, of swellings in the groin and armpits, of fever so intense it left the mind wandering. Some whispered that the sickness came from the east, traveling along trade routes that connected Europe to distant lands. Chroniclers later would trace it across Asia and into Mediterranean ports like Genoa, where fleeing sailors carried it further. You do not know those routes. You only know that something is wrong. The first death in your town seemed unremarkable. A dockworker collapsed with fever. He was buried quickly. Then his wife sickened. Then the man who had shared ale with him 3 nights before. Within days, the pattern sharpened. You notice it first in the bakery queue, fewer customers. Then, one morning, the miller does not deliver flour. You hear he is ill. By the next day, he is dead. The symptoms are frightening in their speed. A person may feel unwell at dawn and be gone by nightfall. The swellings dark, painful lumps appear near the groin or under the arms. Some victims cough blood. Others develop blackened patches on the skin. Later generations will call it the Black Death, a pandemic caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. It spreads through fleas carried by rats, and in some forms through droplets in the air. But you do not know bacteria, you know only terror. The town council meets in haste. Measures are discussed. Streets are ordered clean, though what cleaning means in a medieval context is limited. Fires are lit to purify the air. Some believe foul smells cause disease. If so, stronger smells might counteract them. Physicians, if your town has any, consult texts rooted in ancient humoral theory. They prescribe bloodletting to balance the humors. They recommend poultices of onions, herbs, or even pigeon carcasses placed upon the swellings to draw out poison. You watch one such attempt from a doorway. The patient screams as a bubo is lanced. The stench is overwhelming. Within hours, the patient is dead. Church bells begin to toll more frequently. Funerals multiply until they blur together. At first, each body receives individual prayers. Soon, graves are dug wider, deeper to accommodate multiple corpses. Priests strain to keep up. Some fall ill themselves. The priest of your parish coughs during Mass. He looks pale. You wonder how many hands he has touched during last rites. Commerce falters. Ships hesitate to dock. When they do, crews are viewed with suspicion. Yet you depend on them. Grain shipments feed the town. Without trade, hunger follows disease. You close the bakery early one afternoon because there is not enough flour. Your employer shrugs helplessly. The miller is gone, he says. His son too. You walk home through streets that feel narrower than before. Doors are marked in some towns across Europe, signaling sickness within. Whether your town adopts such measures or not, you sense withdrawal. Neighbors avoid eye contact. Mothers pull children indoors at the sight of a cough. You try to calculate your chances. In some regions, mortality will reach 40 to 60% of the population. In certain towns, even higher. Entire monastic communities will vanish. Fields in the countryside will lie untended for lack of labor. You hear that in London, burial grounds are filling rapidly. Chroniclers will later record tens of thousands dead there alone. At night, you lie awake listening to the scratching in the walls. It is louder now, or perhaps you are simply more aware of it. Your youngest child develops a fever. It begins mildly, a flushed face, a complaint of headache. You tell yourself it could be anything. Childhood illnesses are common. But when you touch the child's neck and feel a swelling beneath the skin, cold realization seeps into your bones. You call for help. The local healer arrives, an older woman with knowledge of herbs and a reputation for calm. She examines the swelling. She says little. She applies a poultice of crushed garlic and vinegar. She advises prayer. You sit beside your child through the night. The fever climbs. The child's breathing becomes shallow. By dawn, the small body is still. There is no time for extended mourning. Death is now too common for prolonged ritual. You wrap the body in linen. You carry it yourself to the churchyard, where space is already scarce. Gravediggers move methodically, faces covered in cloth. They do not linger. You return home empty-armed. Grief competes with fear. If one child has died, what of the others? What of you? In the following days, you notice something strange beneath the horror: silence. Workshops close because masters and apprentices are gone. Markets thin. Entire households shutter their doors and never reopen them. Yet in this devastation lies an unanticipated shift. Labor becomes scarce. If you survive, your work becomes more valuable. Wages, once tightly controlled by guilds and custom, begin to creep upward in some places. Employers desperate to maintain operations offer better terms. Rural lords, facing empty fields, attempt to draw laborers back with promises. Authorities react quickly. In 1349, the English crown issues the Ordinance of Labourers, followed by the Statute of Labourers in 1351, attempting to cap wages and bind workers to their previous positions. The intent is clear: prevent the social order from unraveling. But enforcement will be imperfect. For now, however, you are not thinking of wages. You are thinking of survival. Your spouse begins coughing. You study every sign: the color of skin, the steadiness of breath. You ration what little food remains. You avoid unnecessary contact, though in your cramped quarters avoidance is nearly impossible. Outside, carts creak through streets at dawn, collecting bodies. Some towns employ men specifically for this grim task. In others, families manage alone. You begin to wonder whether the town walls that once promised protection now serve only to trap contagion inside. And as another bell tolls in the distance, you ask yourself a question that would have seemed absurd weeks earlier. If trade built this town, if commerce brought bread and beer and modest prosperity, did it also carry the invisible seeds of its undoing? You stop counting the bells. At first, each toll felt distinct, an announcement of a neighbor's passing, a punctuation mark in the rhythm of town life. Now they blur into one long, low vibration that seems to hang permanently in the air. Your spouse's cough worsens. The fever comes at night, breaking into sweats that soak the thin linen sheets. You keep distance where you can, but distance inside a timber-framed room is a fragile idea. The children, those who remain, sleep against the far wall. You sit between them and the bed, as though your body might serve as a barrier against something you cannot see. Outside, the town shifts from anxious to hollow. Workshops that once rang with hammer blows now sit silent. The cooper's yard is unattended, half-shaped barrels lie abandoned. The blacksmith's forge is cold. Without nails and fittings, repairs across the town slow. Ships that do dock find fewer hands to unload cargo. You venture out cautiously to secure food. The market square, once crowded with shouting vendors and clucking hens, now feels too large. A few stalls remain open. Prices have begun to climb, not only because of scarcity, but because those who survive know their goods are harder to replace. Bread is available, but the quality varies wildly. Some loaves are coarse and heavy, mixed with whatever grain can be spared. The assize of bread still technically governs weight and price, but enforcement falters. The officials who once inspected scales are themselves ill or dead. You notice something else: fewer beggars. That is not a kindness, it is arithmetic. You pass the churchyard and see fresh earth turned in wide strips rather than neat individual mounds. In some towns, mass graves are dug beyond the usual burial ground when space runs out. The speed of death overwhelms tradition. Your spouse's condition worsens by evening. A swelling appears at the base of the neck. It is tender, darkening. You recognize it now without needing explanation. The healer returns, her face lined not only by age but by exhaustion. She admits quietly that remedies fail more often than they succeed. "Pray," she says, "and keep the air moving." Air. Many believe the sickness travels through corrupted vapors, miasma. Fires are kept burning in streets to cleanse the atmosphere. Some carry posies of herbs beneath their noses: rosemary, lavender, rue. You have none to spare. That night, your spouse grows delirious. Words spill out disconnected from sense. At one point, they grasp your hand and whisper apologies for leaving, for failing, for nothing at all. You realize with a dull and distant clarity that the apology is unnecessary. No one here controls this. By dawn, you are alone. Grief now feels heavier but also strangely muted. The scale of loss around you dulls the sharpest edges. You wrap another body in linen. You carry it to the churchyard. You wait in line behind others doing the same. There are no elaborate rites. The priest murmurs prayers as quickly as breath allows. His own hands tremble. When you return home, the room feels cavernous despite its size. The scratching in the walls continues. Rats do not mourn. Days pass in a blur of survival tasks. You ration grain carefully. You barter small possessions for extra flour. You consider leaving the town altogether. Some have fled to the countryside, hopping distance from crowded streets will protect them. But reports suggest the sickness follows. Villages are not immune. Trade routes that once enriched town now act as veins carrying contagion inland. You hear that in monasteries, entire communities have perished. In some areas of Europe, chroniclers claim that a third or even half of the population has died. Though numbers in medieval records are imprecise, the scale is undeniable. In England, mortality may reach 40% or more in certain regions. Fields go untilled. Livestock wander untended. Manors that once demanded strict labor services now struggle to find anyone willing or alive to fulfill them. In your town, a curious transformation begins. With so many dead, property becomes available. Houses stand empty. Workshops lack masters. Apprentices, if they survive, find themselves suddenly elevated, no longer merely trainees, but among the few with skills. Guild structures strain under the loss. Regulations that once tightly controlled entry into trades become difficult to enforce. If only 2 bakers remain where once there were 10, strict limitations on production feel impractical. You begin to hear whispers of opportunity amid devastation. A merchant, recently widowed and childless, offers favorable terms to anyone willing to take over his storage warehouse. He has no heirs left. A cooper seeks partners to revive the barrel trade, promising shared profits. You are still grieving, yet hunger presses. The children need stability. You find yourself contemplating choices that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Before the plague, your position in town life was relatively fixed. Advancement required years of apprenticeship, guild approval, fees. Now, gaps have opened. Sudden and terrible gaps. Authorities, however, grow uneasy. The Crown in England, aware that labor shortages could empower workers, begins preparing legal responses. In 1349, the Ordinance of Laborers attempts to require able-bodied individuals to work for pre-plague wages. Refusal could result in imprisonment. The message is clear. Social order must not unravel simply because death has thinned the ranks. But enforcing such laws in a landscape of mass mortality is complicated. Who will arrest whom? Who will replace those who leave? In the evenings, you sit by the hearth with your surviving children. You tell them stories, not grand tales, but small reassurances, that tomorrow will come, that bread will be baked again in steady numbers, that markets will return. You are not certain of any of it. The town soundscape changes. Fewer voices, fewer carts, fewer animals. The silence is so complete that even the wind between buildings feels intrusive. Then gradually, almost imperceptibly, the deaths slow. There are still new cases, but not at the same relentless pace. The healer visits less frequently. The churchyard's fresh earth begins to dry. No one declares the plague finished. It simply recedes, leaving absence behind. You walk through the market square one morning and realize that though the stalls are fewer, they are more spaced. There is room now, physical room, social room. You begin to consider a question that feels almost disloyal to the dead. If you survive this catastrophe, if you endure hunger, grief, and fear, could your life afterward be different? Could the rigid boundaries of guild and status soften in the face of necessity? Or will the old structures snap back into place, determined to preserve the hierarchy that existed before so many were buried beneath fresh soil? The bells stop ringing so often. At first, you do not trust the quiet. You wait for another toll, another cart wheel creaking down the lane at dawn. But the days pass with fewer funerals. The gravediggers return to other work. The churchyard, though scarred by wide strips of freshly turned earth, is no longer expanding at the same desperate pace. The plague has not vanished entirely. It lingers, unpredictable, and it will return in later years. But this first wave, the one that hollowed out your town, has burned through with terrifying efficiency. You step into the street one morning and notice something almost shocking: sunlight reaching the ground. Before, the street felt permanently shadowed by crowded buildings and constant movement. Now, with shutters closed on abandoned houses and fewer bodies pressing through the lane, light filters in more easily. The physical town is the same. The human presence has thinned. You count in your mind. The miller gone. The cooper's eldest son gone. 3 families from the far end of the street gone entirely. Your spouse, your child. In some English towns, historians estimate that mortality reached 40 to 50%. In certain parishes, even higher. Across Europe, perhaps a third of the population perished between 1347 and 1351. The numbers are staggering, but here they are not numbers. They are empty doorways. And yet life resumes. The baker you once worked for approaches you with an offer. He is aging. His apprentice died. His own sons did not survive the winter. He cannot manage the ovens alone. Before the plague, you might have worked years for a chance to become a master baker. Guild membership required fees and approval. Now, rules bend under necessity. If you stay, he tells you, we share the shop. You hesitate. Grief still sits heavy in your chest, but you also see the logic. The ovens must burn. Bread must be made. The town, diminished as it is, still needs to eat. You agree. In the weeks that follow, you find yourself working not merely as a laborer, but as a partner. You make decisions about grain purchases. You negotiate with farmers who now demand higher prices for wheat because labor in the countryside is scarce too. Fields beyond the town walls lie partially untended. In some manors, entire tenant families have vanished. Surviving peasants realize their value. They bargain for better terms. Some demand wages instead of traditional labor services. The crown reacts swiftly. In 1351, the Statute of Laborers is formally enacted under Edward III. It attempts to freeze wages at pre-plague levels and compels able-bodied individuals to accept work when offered. Employers who pay higher wages can be fined. Workers who refuse employment can be imprisoned. On parchment, it is a firm command. In practice, it is uneven. Local officials are often reluctant to enforce harsh penalties against neighbors. Labor shortages are real. If a skilled baker can earn more in another town, what prevents him from leaving? Travel restrictions exist, but enforcement requires manpower that has been buried. You hear rumors from rural areas that some lords are offering reduced rents to attract tenants back to abandoned strips. Others attempt to tighten control, demanding old obligations be met despite reduced populations. Tension simmers quietly. Back in town, you notice subtle but significant shifts. Women who lost husbands take over workshops, at least temporarily. Widows manage inns, cloth stalls, even small shipping ventures. Guild records in some places reflect this unusual flexibility. Though long-term change remains debated, the immediate aftermath of plague opens cracks in rigid structures. You see a former apprentice negotiating directly with a merchant, something that would have required a master's mediation before. You also see fear linger. Every cough in winter draws wary glances. When a stranger arrives by ship, whispers follow. The memory of mass graves is too recent to ignore. But something else has changed in you. Before the plague, your life felt tightly circumscribed. Advancement required patience within established hierarchies. Now, survival itself has disrupted that order. You are still bound by law, by church, by crown. The parish priest preaches that the plague was God's judgment, a reminder of mortality and sin. Processions of penitents occasionally pass through town, self-flagellating in dramatic displays of repentance, a movement that spread across parts of Europe during the height of the pandemic. Authorities sometimes suppress them, fearing unrest. The church itself has been weakened. Many clergy died while tending to the sick. Replacements are hastily appointed, sometimes less educated, less experienced. Faith endures, but institutional authority shows strain. In your bakery, you adjust recipes to stretch limited grain supplies. You experiment with mixing barley and rye more evenly. You keep careful track of weight, knowing that civic oversight will eventually reassert itself more firmly. You notice customers have changed too. Those who survived carry a quiet intensity. They bargain harder. They waste less. Some speak openly about leaving town to seek opportunities elsewhere. Others cling fiercely to routine, as though predictability might ward off future catastrophe. Months pass. Trade begins to recover cautiously. Ships return to port, though not at previous frequency. Foreign merchants speak of devastation in places like Florence and Paris, where death reshaped urban life much as it did here. Europe as a whole feels altered, less crowded, more fragile. Years later, the demographic shock will contribute to long-term transformations. With fewer workers, bargaining power shifts gradually toward laborers. Agricultural practices adapt. In some regions, marginal lands are abandoned. Pasture replaces grain in certain areas, particularly in England, where wool production becomes increasingly profitable. Historians will debate whether the plague accelerated the decline of feudalism. In England, pressures from labor shortages, taxation, and attempts to enforce wage controls will culminate decades later in the peasants' revolt. From your vantage point, these are distant tremors. What you feel immediately is narrower and more personal, a slight widening of possibility. You now co-own a bakery. You earn more than you once did. Your surviving children have a chance, perhaps a stronger one than before, to inherit something tangible. Yet the cost of this shift is immeasurable. At night, when the ovens cool and the streets quiet, you sometimes walk past the churchyard. You stand at the edge of the newer graves. There are no elaborate markers for most, just earth. You think about how fragile the town proved to be, how trade once its strength carried invisible danger, how tightly ordered systems can unravel in months. And you wonder something unsettling. If catastrophe could dismantle so much so quickly, if death on this scale could loosen ancient bonds and alter economic relationships, what else in your world is less permanent than it appears? The walls of the town still stand, the guild still meets, the crown still issues laws, the church still preaches eternal order. But you have seen how swiftly numbers can change, how silence can replace noise, how opportunity can grow from devastation. You survived the plague's first assault. But survival, you now understand, is not simply endurance, it is adaptation. And if another wave comes, as it will, in time will the town adapt again? Or will the next silence be deeper than the first? Story 3. Cold Stone and Colder Rules. Inside a medieval castle household. You might think a castle is a refuge. From a distance, it certainly looks like one. Thick stone walls rise from a hilltop. Towers anchor each corner. A gatehouse stands fortified with heavy oak doors bound in iron. A banner lifts and falls in the wind, bearing the heraldic symbol of your lord. But if you believe you would be safer or more comfortable inside those walls, you have not yet woken there on a winter morning. It is the late 14th century in England. The long wars with France continue in uneasy cycles following the reign of Edward III. Castles dot the countryside not merely as symbols of status, but as instruments of control and defense. You are not the lord of this castle. You are part of the household, one of dozens, perhaps over 100, depending on the size of the estate. You might be a kitchen servant, a scullion scrubbing pots blackened by years of soot. You might be a guard assigned to the outer wall. You might be a lady's maid, sleeping in a narrow space off the great chamber. Wherever you rank, you wake before dawn. The cold is your first sensation. Stone does not retain warmth. Even with tapestries hung along interior walls to block drafts, the chill penetrates. In summer, the thickness offers relief. In winter, it becomes an unyielding reservoir of damp. You sleep not in a private chamber, but in a communal space. Servants lie on pallets stuffed with straw or rushes. Blankets are wool, coarse and heavy. If you are fortunate, you share body heat with others. A horn sounds faintly in the courtyard. You rise quickly. There is hierarchy here, precise and visible. The castle is not only a military structure, but a carefully ordered social organism. At its center stands the lord, perhaps a baron sworn to a greater noble, who in turn owes allegiance to the king. Beneath him, knights, stewards, clerks, chaplains, squires, servants, cooks, grooms, laundresses. Everyone knows their place. You pull on woolen hose and a simple tunic. Leather shoes, stiff and cracked, await near your pallet. There is no glass in most windows, only shutters or oiled cloth. The pre-dawn air moves freely through corridors. The great hall lies at the heart of the castle. It is vast compared to village huts or town houses. A central hearth burns continuously, smoke rising toward a louvered opening in the roof. Even so, the air is thick with soot. Long wooden tables line the hall. At the far end, raised slightly on a dais, stands the high table where the lord and his immediate family dine. Your morning begins in motion. If you serve in the kitchens, you descend a narrow stone stair to a cavernous space below. Fires already crackle beneath iron cauldrons. Bread must be baked daily. Meat, if available, must be salted, boiled, or roasted. Supplies come from the estate's land's grain from tenant farmers, livestock from surrounding fields. The castle is sustained by the labor of those beyond its walls. If you are assigned to the stables, you cross the courtyard where frost glitters on cobblestones. Horses snort in their stalls. They are expensive, essential assets. War horses in particular are valuable beyond measure. A destrier trained for battle represents years of investment. You shovel manure, you check hooves, you rub down flanks with coarse cloth. If you serve indoors as a chamber attendant, you carry basins of water for washing. Privacy is minimal. Even the lord's solar, the private chamber off the great hall, is not entirely secluded. Sound carries easily through stone. The lord rises later than you, but not by much. His day is structured by obligation, overseeing estate management, hearing petitions from tenants, corresponding with allies, perhaps training with arms in the courtyard. Feudal life within a castle is a web of duties. The steward manages finances, rents collected, supplies stored, wages paid. The clerk keeps written records in careful script, often in Latin or Anglo-Norman French. Literacy is rare among lower servants but common among administrative staff. You may catch glimpses of parchment rolls listing rents owed by peasants on nearby manors. Every bushel of grain, every pig, every hen is accounted for. The castle's apparent strength depends on meticulous record-keeping. Breakfast in the hall is modest compared to the evening meal. Coarse bread, ale, perhaps leftover pottage. The lord dines separately, with better fare white bread made from finely sifted wheat, perhaps salted beef or venison if hunting has been successful. Hunting is not merely sport. It is a privilege tied to status. Forest laws restrict who may pursue deer or boar. Unauthorized hunting can bring severe penalties. Game belongs to the lord. After breakfast, the castle stirs fully awake. Messengers arrive at the gatehouse. The portcullis creaks upward to admit them. News travels slowly, carried by horse and memory. Letters sealed with wax bear tidings from other estates, from regional courts, sometimes even from the royal administration. You hear mention of unrest in certain shires. Taxes levied to support ongoing military campaigns weigh heavily on both nobles and peasants. Memories of the peasants' revolt are still recent enough in this late-century world to cause unease among the ruling class. Though the revolt was suppressed, its shock lingers. Castles are not only homes, they are bulwarks against discontent. You climb a spiral staircase to deliver linens to an upper chamber. The steps are narrow, designed deliberately to disadvantage attackers who ascend with swords in their right hands. Defense shapes architecture. From the battlements, the view stretches across rolling fields. Tenant cottages dot the landscape. You can see smoke rising from their chimneys, thinner, more fragile than the thick plumes within these walls. The contrast is stark. Inside, there is abundance compared to village life. Meat more regularly. Spices imported through long trade routes, pepper, cinnamon though used sparingly because of cost. Silver goblets, carved chests. But comfort is relative. Sanitation remains rudimentary. Waste is deposited in guardrobes, latrine shafts built into the castle walls, emptying into pits or the moat below. The smell can be overwhelming, especially in warmer months. Water must be drawn from wells within the courtyard. If a siege occurs, that well becomes lifeline and vulnerability simultaneously. You consider the possibility of siege. Castles are designed for it. Thick curtain walls, arrow slits, machicolations from which defenders can drop stones or boiling liquids. Supplies are stockpiled: salted meat, dried peas, barrels of ale. Yet siege life is grueling. Food dwindles. Disease spreads easily in confined spaces. Morale fractures. Though you may never experience a full-scale siege, the architecture reminds you daily that conflict is assumed, not exceptional. As afternoon fades, preparations begin for the main meal. The great hall fills gradually. Servants move in choreographed patterns. Dishes are carried from kitchen to table in sequence. Etiquette is strict. Who sits where matters. Who is served first matters. You stand behind the high table, ready to refill cups. Conversation at the Lord's end may concern estate revenues, marriage alliances, or shifting loyalties among neighboring nobles. Politics is personal here. A marriage can secure land. A feud can spark violence. You listen without appearing to listen. Below the dais, lesser household members eat at trestle tables. Bread trencher plates soak up juices from stews. Afterward, these soaked pieces may be given to the poor or fed to animals. Music sometimes accompanies the meal. A minstrel plucks at a lute. Stories are told of chivalric exploits, of distant campaigns in France during the long conflict that history will call the 100 Years' War. You have never seen France, but the war shapes taxation, shapes alliances, shapes the very reason this castle stands fortified. When the meal ends, candles burn low. Tallow drips onto wooden holders. Servants clear plates swiftly. Your day is not yet done. There are floors to sweep, ashes to remove, animals to secure for the night. You pass through corridors lit only by flickering light, shadows stretching across stone. You think about your position. Inside these walls, you are closer to power than peasants in distant fields. You eat better. You sleep under thicker roofs. But you are bound by stricter rules. You cannot leave without permission. You cannot speak freely to superiors. Advancement depends on favor and loyalty. A single accusation of theft, of impropriety could see you dismissed or worse. The castle promises protection. It also enforces order. As you settle onto your pallet once more, listening to wine slide along battlements above, you wonder something quietly unsettling. Is life within stone walls truly safer, or simply another kind of confinement? And if conflict comes to these gates, will the thickness of the walls be enough to shield you from the forces gathering beyond them? You wake before the frost has lifted from the inner courtyard. The castle does not sleep deeply. Even at night, guards pace the wall walk, boots scraping against stone. A watchman calls the hour into darkness. Somewhere below, a horse shifts in its stall. Wind moves along the battlements with a low, steady hum. You rise when summoned, not when rested. Inside a medieval castle, time belongs to hierarchy. The steward has ordered an early assembly in the great hall. Word has arrived from a neighboring estate, a dispute over grazing rights along a shared boundary. It is a small matter in the grand sweep of history, but here it carries weight. Land defines power. Boundaries define income. You stand at the edge of the hall as tenants from outlying villages are ushered in. They remove caps, bowing stiffly. Mud clings to their boots. They have walked miles to bring their complaint. Their presence reminds you that the castle is not merely a residence. It is the administrative heart of the surrounding manor system. The lord enters, robed in wool lined with fur against the cold. He is not a king, but within these walls his authority feels absolute. He inherited this estate through lineage tied, however distantly, to the broader feudal chain stretching upward to the crown of England. He takes his seat at the raised table. The steward unrolls parchment. Disputes are heard carefully. Witnesses speak. The clerk records proceedings in a practiced hand. Fines may be imposed. Orders given. What seems minor who may pasture sheep on which meadow determines whether a family's animals survive winter. You observe how justice here is both personal and structural. There is no impersonal bureaucracy. Decisions rest on memory, reputation, alliances. When the matter concludes, oaths are sworn. Hands are placed upon a Bible held by the chaplain. The church sanctifies secular authority. You notice something subtle. The tenants speak cautiously but not silently. The aftermath of the peasants' revolt lingers in memory, even if years have passed. Though the revolt was crushed and leaders like Wat Tyler executed, its message that common people could organize has not been forgotten by either side. Authority within the castle feels firm, but outside, fields stretch wide and difficult to monitor entirely. By mid-morning, the hall empties. You are assigned to accompany a small hunting party. Hunting reinforces hierarchy. Only those of rank may legally pursue deer within designated forests. The forest laws developed under earlier monarchs remain in force. Poaching can result in severe penalties, fines, mutilation, even death in earlier centuries. You ride not on a war horse but on a smaller mount, keeping pace behind knights in mail and padded gambesons. They carry bows and spears. Dogs strain against leashes, eager. The forest air is sharp. Frost cracks beneath hooves. You move through a landscape that appears wild but is carefully managed. Woods are resources: timber for building, fuel for hearths, cover for game. A deer breaks from brush. The chase begins in a flurry of sound. Hounds baying, men shouting, hooves pounding earth. The animal's speed is impressive, but coordination favors the hunters. When it falls, brought down by a well-placed arrow, the moment is both triumphant and sobering. Blood darkens fallen leaves. The carcass will feed the high table for days. Portions may be distributed according to rank. You help hoist the body onto a cart. The castle's apparent abundance depends on these orchestrated displays of dominance over land, over animals, over people. Upon returning, you carry fresh water to the kitchens. The cooks work tirelessly, transforming raw ingredients into meals structured by status. Spices, costly imports, are used to signal wealth as much as to flavor food. Pepper, arriving through long trade networks stretching beyond Europe, is measured carefully. You watch as meat is carved with precision, the best cuts reserved, lesser portions distributed downward through the ranks. Even food reflects hierarchy. In the afternoon, the chaplain conducts instruction for the lord's younger sons in a small chamber off the hall. Latin phrases echo softly. Education marks distinction. Literacy opens administrative and ecclesiastical paths unavailable to most servants. You pause outside briefly, listening to the cadence of words you do not fully understand. The structure of society is reinforced not only by walls and weapons, but by knowledge. Later, you climb the battlements to relieve a guard. From this height, you see beyond the immediate lands. Smoke rises from distant villages. A thin road snakes toward the horizon. Travelers move slowly, merchants, perhaps, or messengers carrying sealed letters. The wider kingdom is restless. Taxes to fund ongoing campaigns in France during the 100 Years' War continue to strain estates. Even nobles feel pressure. Ransom demands for captured knights, costs of armor and horses, contributions expected by the crown. You consider how the castle functions as both shield and burden. It requires maintenance, stone repairs, timber replacement, constant provisioning. Without steady income from tenants, its strength erodes. Toward evening, a messenger arrives breathless at the gate. Bandits have been sighted along the nearby road. A merchant caravan attacked, goods stolen, one guard injured. Banditry flourishes in periods of instability. Discharged soldiers, displaced peasants, desperate men. Violence can spread along neglected routes. The Lord orders increased patrols. The castle's garrison, modest but trained, prepares to ride at dawn. You feel a ripple of tension pass through the household. If conflict escalates, the castle could face more than minor skirmishes. Though large-scale sieges are less common in this later medieval period than in earlier centuries, fortified positions remain targets in regional disputes. That night, the atmosphere in the great hall shifts subtly. Conversation is quieter. The Lord confers privately with his captain-at-arms. You refill cups without drawing attention. You realize something quietly important. Inside these walls, security depends not only on stone thickness, but on constant vigilance, legal, economic, military. As you settle to sleep, wrapped in wool against the creeping cold, you weigh your position again. You are closer to power than a field laborer. You eat better than many. You witness decisions that shape dozens of lives. Yet your safety is conditional. If the Lord falls out of favor, if debts mount, if enemies gather, if rebellion stirs again in the countryside, the castle stands firm for now. But stone does not make you invincible. If the walls are ever tested by siege, by famine, by internal betrayal, where would you stand in the hierarchy of protection? And when power shifts, as it inevitably does, will those at the edges of the hall be shielded or sacrificed first? The day the gates close, you feel it before you understand it. There is no dramatic trumpet blast, no fiery assault on the horizon. Instead, it begins with tension, measured orders, shortened tempers, guards posted in doubled numbers. The bandits sighted days ago were not merely thieves. They were former men-at-arms, dismissed from a minor lord's retinue after a dispute over unpaid wages. Displaced, armed, and experienced, they have begun harassing travelers and probing estate boundaries. Your lord cannot ignore it. At dawn, riders return with troubling news. A nearby manor house has been raided, grain stores looted, a steward beaten. The attackers numbered more than expected. The decision is made quickly. The outer gates are shut, the portcullis lowered, drawbridge chains groan as wood lifts from its resting place over the shallow moat. From the courtyard, you watch the transition from residence to fortress. Inside the walls, activity sharpens. Archers inspect bowstrings, arrow supplies are counted, barrels of water are moved closer to vulnerable positions in case of fire. The steward orders a review of provisions. Salted pork, dried peas, oats, barley, cheese wheels stored in the cool undercroft. You are assigned to carry sacks of grain into the inner keep. Your shoulders ache, but you work without complaint. In moments like this, obedience is survival. The castle was designed for such a scenario. Arrow slits narrow from the outside, flared within allow defenders to shoot while remaining protected. Machicolations over the gatehouse enable stones or hot liquids to be dropped on attackers. The curtain wall, thick and high, commands the surrounding approach. But fortification has limits. You recall the stories told in the hall of long sieges in earlier centuries, of starvation within walls, of disease spreading faster in enclosed spaces. Stone does not grow food. Wells can run dry or become contaminated. You glance toward the inner well as servants draw water rapidly. Its depth and reliability are crucial. A castle without water is a tomb. The Lord gathers the household in the great hall. He stands beneath the hanging banner, flanked by his captain-at-arms and the chaplain. His voice is steady. He reminds you that the castle has endured before, that loyalty will be rewarded, that disorder beyond the walls must not infect order within them. Oaths are renewed hands placed upon Scripture. The chaplain invokes divine protection, framing the threat as a test of faith as much as of arms. You kneel with the others. In that moment, you understand how layered your existence is. You serve a lord who serves greater lords, all beneath the crown of England. Authority flows downward. Protection flows upward, at least in theory. But protection depends on power. The first sign of confrontation comes near dusk. From the battlements, a guard signals movement along the tree line. A small group of mounted men emerges, pausing beyond bowshot. They do not charge, they observe. It is a message: we are here. You are ordered to the wall walk with a bundle of arrows. Your hands tremble slightly as you distribute them to archers positioned along the parapet. The tension is thick but quiet. No assault comes that night. Instead, days pass in a state of readiness. The gates remain closed. No one enters or leaves. Supplies are rationed cautiously, though not yet severely. Routine adjusts. Meals in the great hall are simpler, less meat, more pottage. Even the Lord reduces visible indulgence, aware that morale depends on shared sacrifice. You notice subtle shifts in behavior. Knights drill more frequently in the courtyard, practicing formations and swordplay. Servants speak in hushed tones. The chaplain holds additional prayers. And you begin to see the castle differently. Before, its cold stone felt oppressive. Now it feels protective. The thickness of walls, once a symbol of hierarchy, becomes reassurance. The narrow spiral staircases designed to hinder attackers are suddenly comforting in their strategic intent. Yet confinement takes its toll. Without regular deliveries from surrounding lands, the castle relies solely on stored goods. Fresh vegetables become scarce. Bread grows denser as flour is stretched. Ale is diluted. Waste accumulates more quickly. The guardrobes empty into pits below, but with increased occupancy and reduced airflow, the smell intensifies. Tempers fray. A minor argument in the kitchen over allocation of flour escalates until the steward intervenes sharply. In peacetime, such disputes are trivial. Under siege conditions, they threaten cohesion. On the fourth day, the attackers test the walls. Under cover of early morning mist, a small group approaches within bowshot. Arrows fly both directions. One of your archers is grazed along the shoulder. He does not fall, but blood stains his tunic. You crouch behind the crenellations, heart pounding. The sound of arrows striking stone is sharp and startling. The attackers withdraw quickly. It was not a full assault, more a probe. But the message is clear. This will not resolve quietly. The Lord convenes his captain-at-arms. A decision is made to send a small mounted force out through a concealed postern gate under cover of night, hopping to scatter the bandits before they gather strength. You are not among those selected to ride. You remain within the walls, tasked with reinforcing doors and ensuring water barrels are filled. The night is long. You listen for sounds beyond the walls, clashing steel, shouts. Instead, there is only wind. At dawn, the riders return. 2 horses come back riderless. The captain at arms is wounded but alive. The bandits have retreated deeper into woodland, scattered but not destroyed. The threat lingers, diminished but unresolved. Over the following week, tension gradually eases. Patrols from neighboring estates arrive in coordination, alliances between lords reasserting regional control. The bandits, facing organized resistance, disperse. The gates reopen. Light floods into the courtyard more freely. Deliveries resume cautiously. Fresh news arrives from beyond the walls. Life inside the castle resumes its structured rhythm. But you are not quite the same. You have seen how quickly order can tilt toward crisis. How the castle's strength depends not only on stone, but on coordination, on loyalty, on supplies, on alliances extending beyond its immediate grounds. You realize something quietly profound. The castle is not a self-contained world. It survives only through constant exchange with tenants, with neighboring lords, with the crown. Isolation protects temporarily, but long-term survival requires connection. From the battlements, you look once more across the surrounding lands. Fields stretch outward. Villages send thin threads of smoke into the sky. Roads wind toward distant towns and eventually to centers of power like London. The castle stands solid. Yet history is not kind to stone alone. Over centuries, warfare will evolve. Cannons will render high walls vulnerable. Political structures will centralize. The role of the medieval castle as fortress will diminish, replaced by more comfortable manor houses and shifting forms of governance. For now, though, you remain within cold walls governed by colder rules. You have endured confinement, tension, and the quiet mathematics of hierarchy. You may have imagined that a castle would guarantee your survival. But you now understand that survival depends less on walls and more on the fragile web of obligations and alliances that hold those walls in place. If that web snaps, stone will not save you. And as you settle once more onto your pallet beneath the shadow of battlements, you wonder, when the next crisis comes, war, rebellion, famine, will this fortress feel like sanctuary again? Or will it become something far more precarious? Story 4. Pilgrim's Blisters. Walking to Canterbury in the Middle Ages. You do not begin as a traveler. You begin as someone who has stayed in one place for most of your life. The fields you know, the church bell you recognize, the narrow track to the nearby market town. Your world, like that of most people in medieval England, is small in distance but large in repetition. And yet one morning, you decide to leave it. Perhaps you have taken a vow. A child survived a fever, and you promised a pilgrimage in thanks. Perhaps you seek healing for yourself, an ache in your joints, a cough that lingers too long. Or perhaps you are drawn by the stories, repeated by travelers and in sermons, of miracles reported at the shrine of Thomas Becket. His death in 1170, struck down in Canterbury Cathedral by knights loyal to Henry II, transformed him into a martyr almost overnight. The church canonized him swiftly. Pilgrims have been walking to his shrine ever since. You are one of them now. The decision feels bold, but the reality begins quietly with boots. You inspect your footwear carefully, leather worn but sturdy. You wrap strips of cloth around your feet to prevent blisters, though you know they will come anyway. You pack lightly, a spare tunic, a small loaf of bread, perhaps dried peas in a pouch, a wooden cup, a cloak against rain. Around your neck, you hang a simple token, perhaps a small wooden cross. When you reach Canterbury, you hope to purchase a pilgrim badge bearing Becket's image. Worn visibly on your return, it will signal both your devotion and your endurance. You set out at dawn. The road is less a road and more a path worn by centuries of feet and hooves. In dry weather, it is dusty. In rain, it becomes mud that clings to your boots and slows each step. You are not alone for long. Pilgrimage is both solitary and communal. Along the way, you join others heading in the same direction. A widow from a nearby village. A young man seeking forgiveness for a fight that ended badly. A merchant combining devotion with trade, carrying small goods to sell along the route. You walk together loosely. Travel in medieval England is not without danger. Bandits lurk in wooded stretches. Stray dogs follow too closely. Inns are uneven in quality, some welcoming, others suspiciously eager for coin. But pilgrimage routes are among the safest forms of travel available. Religious purpose offers a degree of protection. Hospitality toward pilgrims is considered virtuous. By midday, your shoulders ache beneath the weight of your pack. You had imagined walking to be simple. After all, you walk daily in your own fields, but this is different. The miles accumulate without the familiar rhythm of agricultural tasks. There is no plow to guide, no harvest to measure progress, only distance. You stop at a roadside shrine, a small wooden structure with a painted saint inside. Candles flicker faintly. You kneel briefly, more from habit than exhaustion. The rhythm of your life has shifted. On the second day, blisters form. They begin as warm irritations beneath the skin. By evening, they swell painfully. You consider turning back, but the thought feels like betrayal of your vow, of your intention, perhaps even of the saint whose shrine awaits. You press onward. The landscape changes gradually. Fields give way to stretches of woodland. You pass through market towns where life feels louder than in your village. Bakers shout prices. Blacksmiths hammer iron. Children stare at the growing band of pilgrims moving through. In one such town, you encounter a group of travelers who speak animatedly about a book circulating among educated circles, a collection of stories told by fictional pilgrims on their way to Canterbury. It was written by Geoffrey Chaucer, a court official and poet. You cannot read, but you have heard tales recited aloud, stories of a knight, a miller, a prioress, each telling a different kind of tale along the road. You find comfort in the idea that your journey, too, is part of something larger woven into the fabric of shared experience. By the fourth day, your food supplies run low. You rely on charity. Some monasteries and parish churches offer bread and ale to pilgrims. In return, you promise prayers. Hospitality is both religious duty and practical necessity. The flow of pilgrims sustains local economies along the route. You sleep one night in a barn offered by a sympathetic farmer. The straw smells familiar. It reminds you of home, but you are not home. You are suspended between departure and arrival. The road teaches you endurance. Your legs stiffen in the mornings. Your back protests. Your feet throb with each step. Yet you begin to measure time differently, not by church bells or field work, but by milestones and river crossings. At one river, you must pay a small toll to use a bridge. The coins in your pouch feel lighter afterward. Pilgrimage is spiritual, yes, but it is also economic. Towns along major routes benefit from steady streams of travelers purchasing food, lodging, and devotional items. You pass a group heading the opposite direction, pilgrims returning from Canterbury. They wear small lead badges pinned to their cloaks, depicting the Archbishop's mitred head. They look tired but satisfied. "Is it worth it?" you ask one quietly. He smiles, though his face is lined with fatigue. "It is something you must see for yourself," he says. The final stretch toward Canterbury feels longer than all the rest. Anticipation sharpens your senses. The road grows busier. Vendors appear selling trinkets. Inns advertise beds, though at higher prices than elsewhere. When you finally see the cathedral spire rising above the town, your breath catches not from exertion this time, but from recognition. You have arrived. But arrival is not relief. The town is crowded. Pilgrims from across England and even from continental Europe press through narrow streets. The smell of humanity intensifies. Bells ring almost constantly. Inside the cathedral, light filters through stained glass. The air is cool, heavy with incense. You move with the crowd toward the shrine of Thomas Becket. The shrine itself is ornate, encrusted with jewels donated over generations. Candles burn steadily. People kneel, weep, whisper petitions. You step forward slowly. You had imagined a surge of clarity, perhaps even miracle. Instead, you feel something quieter, an overwhelming sense of shared vulnerability. Every person here carries a burden: illness, grief, guilt, gratitude. You kneel. You do not know if your prayer will be answered. You do not know if your journey has changed anything beyond the blisters on your feet. But you know this: you have left your small world and entered a larger one, bound by faith and fragile bodies moving across muddy roads. As you rise and step aside for the next pilgrim, you begin to wonder. When you turn back toward home, will you return as the same person who left? Or does the road, once walked, alter you in ways that linger long after the blisters fade? The journey back begins almost immediately. You do not linger at the shrine. You have left coins for candles, whispered your prayers, and touched the relic as instructed. Now the road stretches ahead, muddy, uneven, and utterly indifferent to your devotion. The outward journey taught you endurance. The return teaches reflection. Your feet are raw but hardened in the weeks of walking. You have learned to wrap them carefully each morning to avoid the worst of the blisters. Every step is still laborious, yet you carry a subtle confidence. You know your pace, your limits, the ways the sun warms or chills the land. You travel with a smaller group now. Some fellow pilgrims lingered to linger in Canterbury, to repeat prayers, or to purchase additional badges. Others are returning home along separate routes. The social dynamics of a pilgrimage become clear. Strangers briefly aligned, connected by purpose and path, then dispersing at crossroads. You carry a sense of temporary community, fragile but reassuring. Along the road, you notice the disparities of life anew. Villages that seemed prosperous months before now show signs of strain. Fields have been left fallow, perhaps due to labor shortages or local illness. Huts have collapsed, and timber from repairs may have been diverted elsewhere. Poverty is visible in ragged clothing and hollow-eyed children. Pilgrimage exposes the fragility of daily survival. You share bread and water with those less prepared. In return, stories are exchanged, news from distant towns, tales of miraculous healings, and warnings of bandits who roam during harvest season, when peasants are distracted. You begin to understand that pilgrimage is not only spiritual but profoundly practical. It is a way to observe, to gather intelligence about the kingdom, to witness the breadth of human experience. You see the gaps in feudal control, the cracks in hierarchies, the ways communities adapt to scarcity, sickness, and the whims of nobles. One evening, you stop at an inn along the road. The inn smells of stale ale, smoke, and unwashed bodies. Boards creak underfoot. Travelers of all kinds, merchants, laborers, wandering minstrels, minor knights crowd the common room. You eat sparingly but notice others enjoying hearty portions, some even celebrating minor victories of trade or coin. You overhear a clerk from a nearby manor speaking of rising wheat prices due to poor harvests. You consider how small events, a late frost, a swarm of locusts, a sudden illness ripple outward, affecting towns, inns, and pilgrims alike. Travel teaches humility. By the second week, fatigue is relentless. Your muscles ache differently now, memory of towns and farms blending together. You have walked through miles of mud and stone, through rain that soaks clothing and sun that dries it uncomfortably. You notice how small conveniences like a well-placed wooden plank across a stream can transform difficulty into ease. Your blisters have mostly healed, but new ones appear. You learn to shift weight on your feet, to step lightly, to adjust constantly. You also become attuned to the natural world in a way impossible at home. Birdsong indicates daybreak. Clouds warn of coming storms. River currents are studied before crossing. Even the simple behavior of horses and dogs informs your choices. Pilgrimage is a form of education that no classroom can offer. By the third week, your thoughts turn inward. You consider what you hoped to find at Canterbury and what you actually encountered. Not miracles in the sense of spectacle, but a congregation of humans seeking the same answers, each burdened, each striving. Prayer becomes more a habit than a hope. Reflection becomes more precise. You weigh actions and choices in a new light. A young man walking beside you confesses that he came seeking absolution for a violent act. He feels lighter having spoken. You do not judge. Everyone carries a story. Every step forward is a small attempt to make sense of it. The road challenges your assumptions about your own village life. You realize the world is broader than you imagined. Nobles, clergy, and peasants all share vulnerabilities, just expressed differently. Authority exists, yes, but it is mediated by distance, geography, and circumstance. The crown may dictate law, but enforcement depends on the willing or the able hands of local lords, constables, and village leaders. Each village you pass reminds you, your home is only one microcosm among hundreds. What seems permanent, your house, your family, your routines, is fragile, subject to forces both natural and human. You arrive at a river crossing, slower than before. Water levels have risen after a recent storm. Logs bridge gaps where stones once lay. You help steady a cart carrying goods, earning a small nod of thanks from the merchant driver. You begin to appreciate that cooperation, even among strangers, is essential for survival. Nightfall finds you on a hill overlooking the patchwork of fields that stretch toward home. You cannot yet see your village, but the contours are familiar. You are eager, but also reluctant to leave the wider world behind. The road has changed your perception. Distance has expanded your mind, even as it has beaten your body. Sleep comes fitfully in barns and church porches. The cold bites through cloaks. Rats scurry. Other travelers snore loudly. Yet the discomfort no longer feels punishing. You have adapted. The body learns endurance as much as the mind learns humility. In the mornings, you wake with a quiet ritual, inspecting feet, tying laces, checking provisions. You move through miles almost mechanically, yet with awareness honed by weeks of constant practice. And you wonder, when you return home, will your village, your family, your fields appear the same, or will your perception have irrevocably changed? Will the small details you once ignored, like the bend of a lane, the sound of a bell, the scent of freshly tilled soil, now hold a different weight in your mind? You continue walking, step by step, knowing that arrival is only part of the journey, and that the road itself has left an imprint you cannot yet measure. The village appears first as a blur of hedgerows and smoke. After weeks on the road, the familiar shapes seem almost unreal. Your home, which once felt limiting, now seems simultaneously comforting and confining. The distance has sharpened your senses. The rhythm of the fields, the scent of tilled soil, even the low murmur of neighbors all feel more pronounced. You step onto the familiar path leading into the village. Your feet ache less than before, but every muscle still remembers the miles traveled, the uneven roads, the constant motion of a pilgrim's life. Even your hands, once idle in repetitive tasks, bear subtle calluses from assisting travelers, carrying packs, helping horses. Neighbors pause to notice you. Their faces reveal curiosity, mild envy, and relief. You smell of travel, dust, sweat, smoke from countless hearths along the way. You carry a pilgrim's badge pinned to your tunic, the small depiction of Thomas Beckett's head announcing your devotion and endurance. They murmur of your courage, perhaps exaggerating, as is human nature when recounting feats of hardship. At home, you are welcomed gently. Children of neighbors, now taller than when you left, peer at you from behind doorways. Your own family embraces you, joy tinged with relief. Food is shared. Ale is poured. The hearth burns steadily and the smell of fresh bread fills the house. But life at home is subtly altered. You notice gaps in routine that were invisible before departure. Weeds overtaking small plots, barns in need of repair, a neighbor recovering slowly from illness while you were away. The village, too, has endured while you traveled. Your absence has been felt. Life did not pause, it adapted. The road has left you changed. Walking for days on end taught patience, endurance, and the necessity of cooperation. It revealed the vulnerability of human bodies, the unpredictability of weather, and the delicate structure of social order. You learned to navigate strangers with caution yet trust when necessary. You saw the reach of the church and its influence on both piety and daily life. You observed how small actions such as sharing bread or water could tip a situation towards survival or hardship. In the evenings, as you tend to chores at home, memories of the road recur. You recall nights spent in barns with strangers, the smell of hay mingled with smoke from distant fires. You remember helping carry a cart across a swollen river, the strain of muscles and the coordination required. You remember the collective hush in a cathedral as pilgrims pressed toward Becket's shrine, each seeking hope in the same sacred space. Each act, each observation, etched itself in your mind as a permanent reminder that life is broader than the narrow bounds of village routine. Stories arise naturally. Neighbors ask about the shrine, the journey, the roads. You describe carefully the inns, the people, the hazards, the distant towns you passed. You recount the kindnesses offered by strangers, the lessons learned in endurance, and the insight that survival depends as much on human networks as on personal resolve. Your feet, now healing slowly, bear physical evidence of the journey. Blisters have scarred and hardened. Toenails are discolored from mud, travel, and repeated strain. Each step reminds you of the miles walked and the challenges endured. You contemplate what the pilgrimage has revealed about life itself. The journey exposed the limitations of your previous understanding, how reliant humans are on roads, trade, and communication, how fragile social hierarchies can become when displaced by circumstance, how devotion, necessity, and survival intersect constantly. It emphasized that even a small village exists within a larger, interconnected world. Even the smallest acts of endurance, wrapping your feet against blisters, packing through mud, sharing food with strangers, resonated in ways you could not have predicted. The road was not merely a physical challenge, but a moral and psychological one, demonstrating resilience, patience, and humility. And still, one question lingers quietly as you tend to evening chores, watching the smoke rise from familiar chimneys. What does it mean to truly return home after a journey that has stretched your understanding, reshaped your body, and expanded your awareness of the world beyond the village? Is it possible to resume life as it was, or does the road, once traveled, leave a permanent imprint on who you are and how you see the lives around you? You eat your evening meal in relative silence. The comfort of home is real, yet tempered by the echo of footsteps and voices long left behind on the pilgrimage trail. Your body aches in memory of exertion. Your mind reflects on lessons learned: endurance, vulnerability, human connection, and the fragile, sometimes overlooked intricacies of medieval life. Life returns to routine. Yet in quiet moments, your thoughts drift along the road, the river crossings, the crowded inns, and the cathedral aisle. The pilgrimage has changed you not through spectacle or miracle, but through the steady accumulation of effort, observation, and endurance. The journey is complete, the destination reached, the return made. But the imprint of the road, like the wear on your feet, remains indelible. Story 5, Candlelight and Soot. A day in a medieval workshop. You wake to a low, constant glow. It is not sunlight, not yet, but the steady flicker of tallow candles lining the workshop walls. Smoke curls lazily toward the rafters, a thin haze that will remain throughout the day, settling into every corner, every crack in the stone floor. The scent of wax and soot penetrates your clothing, your hair, your skin, until you are inseparable from the environment itself. It is early morning in a small town of late 14th century England. Outside, the streets are empty, damp with overnight frost. Inside, the workshop hums with life, though few would call it quiet. Metal strikes metal, wood rasped and shaved. A bellows exhales fire, and you feel its warmth even at a distance. You are not the master. You are the apprentice. Perhaps the master is a candle maker, a smith, a carpenter. The specific trade matters less than the rhythm, labor, repetition, endurance. You have been awake before the bell that rings across the town, signaling the opening of shops and the first delivery of bread from the baker down the street. You have learned that the world outside continues regardless of your work inside, but the workshop is where life and livelihood begins. Your hands are rough already. Leather thins, calluses deepen. You rub your fingers carefully, knowing that a single cut or splinter can ruin hours of effort. Each morning you dress in tunic and hose, aprons of leather or coarse cloth to protect against sparks, splinters, and hot wax. You tie your sleeves tightly, knot your cords firmly, and breathe in the scent of oil, sawdust, or molten metal. The master enters, stepping carefully over stray tools. He or she nods at you, a subtle cue that work begins. You check your station. The candlemaker's table is neat but deceptively complex. Beeswax blocks stacked by size, wicks measured to the millimeter, molds cleaned and prepared. The smith's forge glows with a bright, angry orange, demanding respect. Even in a small shop, mistakes are punished silently by the physicality of labor. A dropped tool, a burned finger, a cracked candle, a twisted piece of iron. You begin your task, mindful of every movement. Hands move rhythmically, dipping wicks, smoothing wax, hammering iron into shape, scraping wood clean. Each repetition is deliberate, measured. One misstep can ruin the day's production. You are both a student and a servant, bound to the clock of the workshop, to the expectations of the master, to the unyielding demands of craft. Outside, the town awakens. Carts creak over cobblestones. Horses clop along narrow streets. The church bell tolls again, marking the hour, a sound that punctuates the rhythm of labor with reminders of order beyond the workshop. Merchants set up stalls, bakers slide fresh loaves from ovens, women draw water from wells and gossip quietly. Yet within these walls the focus remains narrow: wax, wood, iron, fire, and sweat. You pause for a moment to catch your breath. The candle flame trembles, smoke rises. You notice small details: the way the molten wax flows, the curve of a newly hammered iron hook, the grain of oak you are planning. These details are boring in one sense. They repeat endlessly, day after day, but they are also crucial. Life outside depends on your diligence. A candle that fails to burn evenly may plunge a home into darkness. A poorly forged hinge may weaken a door or gate. Every product carries consequence, often unseen. The master approaches. Their eyes scan your work. They speak briefly, a correction, a hint, a reminder. You adjust immediately. Apprenticeship is not about argument. It is about observation and obedience. The lessons are embedded in motion, in repetition, in the subtle corrections passed down from one pair of hands to another across generations. By midday, the workshop is thick with smoke and the smell of heat. The air is oppressive, but you have adapted. Your breathing becomes shallow and measured, the movements automatic. Outside, life continues. Children play in the streets. Merchants haggle over prices. The town seems endless, unconnected to your small universe of soot and flame. Lunch is brief: a bit of bread, some cheese, a sip of ale or water. You eat quickly and return immediately. Production cannot pause. There are orders to fulfill, products to create, and the reputation of the master to maintain. Delays or mistakes can ripple through the economy of the town. An inn without candles, a blacksmith unable to repair a cart, a baker's door hinges failing. You work through the afternoon. Hands ache. Sweat runs down your back. Fingers burn. Eyes sting from smoke and constant focus. Yet you persist. Mastery is measured in repetition, in endurance, in the accumulation of knowledge that cannot be rushed. Apprentices may spend years performing menial tasks before being trusted with more complex responsibilities. Each day is both identical and slightly different. A new order, a new challenge, a minor mishap, a correction from the master, a lesson learned quietly through observation. By evening, the light begins to fade. The candles you have created flicker on shelves, their wicks hardened and wax cooled. The forge cools, the bellows rest, and the tools are cleaned carefully. The master gives a final inspection. Approval is granted. Satisfaction, if it is earned, is silent. There are no accolades, only the knowledge that tomorrow the process begins again. You exit the workshop as the sun dips below the horizon. Smoke from hearths fills the streets. You walk along narrow lanes, observing the town you have served unseen during the day. Its rhythm continues regardless. Children still play, carts still roll, bread still bakes. The labor you performed will touch countless lives, though none may acknowledge your contribution. And you wonder, quietly, as your feet tread familiar paths toward your sleeping quarters. In a world where so much depends on unglamorous, repetitive work, how much of life is shaped by those who remain unseen, whose contributions are steady, necessary, and often forgotten? You wake again before dawn, as is expected. Sleep is brief and often uneasy, your body still stiff from yesterday's labor, your hands raw from constant handling of tools and materials. The town outside is quiet now, but the workshop already stirs in anticipation of another day. Tallow candles have been prepared the evening before, the forge stoked, the workbenches cleared of scraps. Everything must be ready, for there is no luxury of pause. Apprenticeship is a rigid structure bound by contracts, expectation, and hierarchy. Your master is the center of the universe within these walls. Their authority is nearly absolute. You perform menial tasks for weeks, months, even years, sweeping floors, fetching water, preparing molds or metal stock. It feels endless, repetitive, and boring, but each action is a lesson in precision, endurance, and attentiveness. A mistake, a dropped tool, a miscut piece of wood, a candle wick too short can not only ruin the product but invite reprimand. By mid-morning, the workshop is alive. The rhythmic strike of hammers on iron echoes from one end to the other. Wood rasped against plane, sparks dancing from the hearth, fills the air with a fine haze. Apprentices like you move in tandem with experienced journeymen, observing closely, mimicking their motions, nodding their decisions. Skill is transmitted silently, through repetition, demonstration, and correction. You dip a wick into molten beeswax. The heat sears your fingers despite leather gloves. You repeat the motion over and over until the candle is uniform. The smell of melted wax and smoke permeates your clothing, your hair, your skin. You are inseparable from the process. A visitor would see only the quiet labor, the flickering candlelight, the focused faces, but the work is essential. Without these candles, homes and chapels would remain dark at night. The workshop sustains daily life in ways that often go unnoticed. Your master calls a brief meeting. Orders have arrived from the local church, a shipment of candles for the Feast of St. Michael. The deadline is tight. You learn that in addition to manual skill, obedience, timing, and discipline are part of survival. Production cannot stop, delays cannot be tolerated, errors are costly. You resume work, mindful of every detail. Even small imperfections are noticed. A wick that leans, a candle that cools unevenly, a tool left out of place. Precision matters. You begin to appreciate how subtly the workshop enforces discipline. It teaches patience, endurance, attention, and respect for hierarchy. Your role is small but critical in the functioning of a larger system. The master relies on you to complete foundational tasks, and the community relies on the master's products for daily survival. Lunch is taken quietly, a small piece of bread, a sip of water or ale. Meals are functional, not pleasurable. You eat swiftly, return to work immediately. Breaks are few and brief. The body is trained for endurance, the mind for observation. Every day, the workshop asserts that diligence and constancy are necessary virtues. In the afternoon, your skills are tested further. You attempt a new type of candle, one for the altar of the local chapel, longer, thinner, and designed to burn evenly throughout the night. Your hands ache. Your fingers stiffen. Yet the master observes silently, correcting only when necessary, leaving you to learn through trial and repetition. Outside, the town continues its rhythm. Carts roll over cobblestones. Children play. Smoke rises from ovens and hearths. Life is busy, noisy, and indifferent. You notice how the workshop operates as a quiet, structured world within the chaos, a microcosm of order, discipline, and production that sustains the surrounding town. As evening approaches, the last candles are removed from molds. The forge is cooled, tools cleaned. The master inspects the day's work. Praise is sparse but measured. Approval is granted silently. You begin to understand that recognition here is functional, not celebratory. You are rewarded with trust, the ability to handle slightly more complex tasks tomorrow, incremental mastery. The day ends quietly. You step outside into the chill of night, carrying the faint odor of smoke and wax. The streets are quieter now. The town prepares for sleep. But you know that tomorrow, as every day, you will return to the same flickering candlelight, the same soot-laden air, the same repetitive tasks that shape skill and endurance. And as you walk home, your mind lingers on a question that the workshop constantly imposes, silently but insistently. If life in the town depends so heavily on the steady, unglamorous labor of people like you, how much of history is built on those who work unseen, who endure repetition, and whose efforts sustain everyone else without recognition? Night falls and the workshop quiets, though it does not fully sleep. Candles cool on shelves, wax hardened and flickerless. Tools rest, dust settling into corners. The forge is black, coals smoldering faintly but no longer hot enough to shape metal. Smoke lingers like a ghost of the day's labor. You breathe deeply, tasting it in your mouth, feeling it in your lungs. It is both oppressive and familiar, a sign that another day has been survived, another set of skills honed. The master retires for the evening. Apprentices are dismissed, but not completely. Small tasks remain: cleaning, organizing, repairing minor tools. You sweep the floor again, noticing the tiny shards of wax, flecks of soot, and splinters of wood that have accumulated. Each is a marker of effort, proof of work completed, and the rhythm of human activity over the day. The work is silent now, contemplative. You pause for a moment, leaning on your broom, and consider what you have learned. The workshop is more than a place of labor. It is a microcosm of medieval society: hierarchy, endurance, skill, patience, and the constant negotiation between human intention and material resistance. The master is both authority and teacher. You are both servant and student. Each task, repeated endlessly, has a subtle purpose: training the body, shaping the mind, ensuring survival. You remember the small lessons from the day: the way wax flows differently in varying temperatures, the precise angle needed for a plane to smooth oak efficiently, the rhythm of hammer strikes that determines whether iron bends correctly or breaks. These are seemingly trivial, repetitive details, but in their mastery lies competence, survival, and even reputation. A poorly made product could injure someone, fail to last, or reflect poorly on the master's reputation, affecting trade, income, and social standing. Outside, the town rests. Smoke drifts from chimneys. Dogs bark in the distance. A few travelers pass along cobbled streets, unaware of the delicate calculations and endless repetition that sustain the town's daily life. You realize how reliant the wider community is on these unseen efforts. The candles will light homes, the hinges will secure doors, the carved wooden tools will assist bakers and carpenters alike. Life depends on consistent, unglamorous work. In your small quarters above the workshop, you finally remove your apron and gloves. Your hands bear the marks of the day: blisters, small cuts, and the thick calluses of repeated effort. You feel the weight of the day's labor in every muscle, but it is a proud weight, a sign that you have contributed to something larger than yourself. You think of the apprentices before you and the journeymen who will follow. Each person's effort accumulates across days, months, and years, sustaining not only the workshop but the town, the surrounding countryside, and the countless unseen lives dependent on its output. You understand now that history is often built not in great battles or speeches, but in the quiet, patient persistence of ordinary labor. Yet even with mastery, nothing is permanent. The wax will melt, the wood will warp, the iron will rust. The rhythm of work must continue. The workshop does not stop for fatigue or celebration. Survival and continuity demand constant attention. Tomorrow the candles must be made again, the forge reignited, the work repeated, just as it has been for generations. And you wonder, quietly as the night deepens, if the world relies on the tireless repetition of unseen hands, how much of human history is shaped by those whose lives are measured in small, steady tasks, rather than grandeur, glory, or power. You close your eyes, exhausted but alert, the scent of wax and soot still lingering. Tomorrow, the routine begins again, and you will repeat it, learning more, enduring more, sustaining more. The workshop has trained your body, sharpened your mind, and revealed the invisible structures that uphold society. Yet it also leaves you with a lingering question. Will the labor of the ordinary ever be fully acknowledged in the stories of history? Story 6. The slow grind of the mill, life as a medieval miller. You wake before the first light touches the fields. Outside, the village is quiet. Smoke rises from chimneys, thin and pale in the morning chill. The river moves steadily past the mill, its current whispering against wooden supports. The sound is constant, unnoticed by many, but it will mark your entire day. You are the miller's apprentice, or perhaps the miller yourself if your years have allowed it. Your life is measured by the turning of a wheel, the creak of timber, the weight of grain. The mill stands apart from other village structures, not in grandeur but in purpose. It transforms the raw produce of countless fields into something that sustains lives, something as simple as flour. Without the mill, bread cannot be made, families go hungry, markets stall. Your labor is silent yet essential. The mill is a mechanical world, alive in its own right. Water drives the wheel. Cogs engage in precise sequence. Stones grind grain into fine powder. A small imbalance, a stone slightly off-center, a wheel misaligned, a sluice gate blocked can ruin hours of work. You inspect the machinery as dawn deepens. Wood must be lubricated, moss cleared, ropes checked. You run your hands over rough surfaces, feeling for cracks, for areas of wear, for evidence of future failure. The master or previous miller begins assigning tasks. You will tend the wheel, monitor the flow of grain, adjust the grindstones, check the sifting mechanisms. Every motion is deliberate. Every detail matters. The mill is both your domain and your master. You cannot escape it, nor can you afford inattention. Mistakes are costly. Flour may be wasted, bread delayed, livelihoods disrupted. As you begin work, the smell of freshly ground grain fills the mill. Dust floats in shafts of morning light. You cough lightly, wiping your eyes, learning to work within the haze without disturbing the rhythm of operations. The wheel turns steadily, water sluicing past with quiet insistence. Time is not measured by bells or sunlight here, but by the pace of grain through stone. Villagers arrive to deliver sacks of wheat, rye, and barley. They greet you with familiarity, sometimes impatience. They trust you to convert their harvest into usable flour efficiently. Each sack is weighed, measured, and prepared carefully. You begin to understand how much of daily life hinges on your diligence. A delay, a miscalculation, a broken stone affects dozens of families. You are both gatekeeper and servant, mediator between the land and sustenance. Children occasionally linger at the edges, fascinated by the turning wheel, the rush of water, the dust rising. They ask questions, curious and insistent. You answer briefly, aware that your time is measured and valuable. The mill tolerates neither distraction nor carelessness. By midday, your hands are rough, your muscles engaged in continuous motion. The wheel demands attention. The sluice requires careful adjustments. Grain accumulates faster than it can be ground if you are inattentive. Mistakes accumulate silently. You notice the wear on wooden gears, the chipping of stones, the occasional grain that escapes into the mechanism, threatening a jam. Each problem demands attention, understanding, and patience. Meals are quick, a piece of bread, perhaps cheese or fruit if the season allows. You eat while leaning against sacks, resting briefly before returning to the continuous rhythm of the mill. Outside, life carries on. Villagers tend fields, shepherds move their flocks, merchants travel dusty roads. You are embedded in a microcosm of industry that hums quietly, shaping lives invisibly. In the afternoon, maintenance becomes unavoidable. A stone must be dressed, a wheel adjusted, moss cleared from the sluice. You work steadily, methodically. Sweat collects under your tunic, hands sore and dust-coated. Yet there is satisfaction in motion. The mill hums smoothly again, flour begins to flow, grain becomes bread's foundation. As evening approaches, activity slows. The last sacks are processed, mechanisms cleaned, the wheel's pace gradually reduced. You step outside, stretching stiff limbs, watching the river reflect the fading light. The village moves into quiet smoke curling from chimneys, dogs barking, distant voices calling to neighbors. You have been essential today, yet the work leaves little visible trace. Flour is packed, delivered, used. The impact is profound but invisible to most. You pause for a moment, reflecting. The mill is both life-giver and master. It demands constant attention, yet offers sustenance and security in return. It reminds you that survival is slow, repetitive, and often unnoticed. Lives are fed not by glory, but by quiet endurance, by diligence, by mastery of ordinary, demanding labor. And as you prepare to rest, you wonder quietly, how many lives have passed through the millstones before you, shaped by the same labor? And how much of history depends on the unglamorous, steady work of people like you, whose efforts are essential yet invisible? The sun rises again, low and pale over the river. You return to the mill, feet heavy, muscles still sore from yesterday's labor. Dust from grain coats your tunic, your hair, your hands, a subtle reminder that the work never truly ends. The mill is alive once more. The wheel turns, sluices shift, cogs groan and grind. You are part of its rhythm now, inseparable from stone and timber, water and wheel. Your morning begins with inspection. You check the stone beds, ensuring that the upper millstone is centered and properly dressed. If it is not, the grain will grind unevenly, producing coarse flour or even damaging the stone itself. You run your hands along the surface, feeling the texture, listening for subtle vibrations that signal imbalance. The mill is both mechanical and living. It will respond to neglect, misuse, and care. Sacks of grain arrive from local farmers. You weigh them, record their origin, and feed them steadily into the hopper. Each batch is measured for quality and quantity, processed with care. One error, an overfilled hopper, a misaligned stone can ruin hours of work. The village depends on your attention. Bread, porridge, ale, and pastry all flow from these mechanisms, sustaining life silently yet vitally. Apprenticeship, if you are one, is unrelenting. Your master moves among you, observing your every action. One misstep, one inattentive motion prompts instruction: how to adjust a stone, how to regulate water flow, how to monitor sifting. You repeat these lessons over and over, muscle memory gradually replacing conscious thought. Mastery is measured in hours of repetition, in endurance under monotony, in vigilance against small, accumulating errors. By mid-morning, sweat drips down your back. Dust fills your lungs, grit coats your eyes. The wheel's constant rotation is hypnotic. You move in sync with it, adjusting levers, tending gears, scraping excess flour from surfaces. Your body is fatigued, yet your mind becomes sharp, attuned to small changes, the subtle whisper of misaligned stone, the smell of burning flour, the rhythm of water against wheelboards. Villagers pass outside, some stopping briefly. They comment on the quality of flour, ask when the next batch will be ready. Your work is invisible in its final form, yet essential to their survival. You realize the mill is a nexus, connecting land, labor, and sustenance. Each loaf, each meal, each act of daily living depends on the slow, consistent work of grinding stones and flowing water. Lunch is brief. A hunk of bread, a small chunk of cheese, a sip of ale from a shared jug. Conversation is minimal, work resumes immediately. Hours stretch into afternoon. You notice patterns. The grain runs differently depending on moisture, stones shift subtly over time, sluices need constant adjustment. Every detail matters. Every minute counts. The work is repetitive, even monotonous, yet it teaches endurance in a profound way. You learn to pace yourself, conserve energy, anticipate small problems before they become disasters. You observe the rhythm of water, the way timber creaks, the patterns of grain flow. The mill demands awareness as much as strength, patience as much as precision. By late afternoon, the rhythm begins to change. Sacks are finished, the last batches of flour pass through the stones, the wheel slows slightly as the river current diminishes. You perform maintenance, cleaning surfaces, checking timbers for wear, ensuring the sluices are secure. The mill rests briefly, though you know tomorrow it will awaken again without pause. Evening comes and the river's reflection paints the workshop walls in gold. You step outside, limbs stiff, hands raw. The village moves toward evening chores. Bread ovens fire up, livestock are secured, fires burn steadily in homes. You have fed this cycle through your labor, silently and without recognition. The mill stands at the center of life, largely unseen yet irreplaceable. As you pause, observing the flowing river, the turning wheel, the small lights of the village, you reflect on the relentless nature of the work. How much of daily life and of history itself depends on unglamorous, repetitive labor, on people whose names are forgotten but whose work sustains entire communities. And in that hidden labor, what stories go untold, what lessons remain unacknowledged. Night settles over the village and the mill finally comes to rest. The wheel slows, the sluices are closed, and the cogs cease their creaking rhythm. Flour dust hangs faintly in the air, settling like a ghost of the day's work. You stand for a moment, hands coated in fine powder, listening to the gentle lap of the river against the wooden supports. It is quiet now, but the mill's presence is constant, a silent guardian of survival. Even as the wheel stops, the lessons of the day linger. You have moved grain from sack to stone, monitored water flow, adjusted machinery, and corrected small misalignments countless times. Each repetition has reinforced the fragile balance between human skill and mechanical precision. The mill is unforgiving of carelessness, yet generous to those who learn to anticipate, to notice, to endure. You think about the villagers who will use your labor without ever knowing your name. Bakers, housewives, apprentices of their own trades, they will shape meals, feed families, and maintain their homes thanks to the flour you produced. Life in the medieval world relies on these invisible contributions. Hands unseen, work unnoticed, effort repeated day after day. History, if it remembers them at all, often notes only the outcomes, never the patient labor that made them possible. Apprenticeship has shown you the duality of this existence. You are bound by obligation, trained through repetition, yet empowered through knowledge and skill. You understand processes that few others in the village grasp, yet your work is taken for granted, merged seamlessly into the daily flow of life. Survival depends on this hidden labor, on vigilance, endurance, and mastery of small, critical details. You clean the mill one final time before heading home. Wooden gears are brushed, stone surfaces scraped, floors swept. Tools are returned to their proper places. The river murmurs its eternal song, and the wheel now rests, poised to begin again at dawn. The rhythm of life will resume without pause, indifferent to fatigue, distraction, or misfortune. Stepping outside, the night air is crisp, carrying the scent of grain and water. Smoke curls from chimneys as the village settles into sleep. The workday is over, yet the consequences of your labor will continue. Families will rise tomorrow to bread on their tables, ale in their cups, meals made possible by the slow grind of stones you tended. The mill is a fulcrum on which daily life balances a microcosm of continuity, patience, and resilience. You pause at the riverbank, looking back at the mill silhouetted against the starlit sky. It is unglamorous, steady, indispensable. You feel the weight of responsibility in your bones, the constant vigilance, the awareness that errors have real consequences, the realization that your body, your skill, and your endurance form the invisible backbone of village survival. And as you turn toward your small dwelling, the last question settles in your mind. If history is remembered through battles, kings, and laws, what of the slow, relentless labor of people like you, millers, artisans, and apprentices whose endurance and skill sustain life quietly, day after day, unseen yet essential? The mill will turn again at dawn, and you will turn with it, learning, enduring, and sustaining life one slow grind at a time. Story 7. The monotony of the manor, daily life in a medieval household. You wake to the low, hollow echo of the manor bell. Its toll is steady, persistent, and it shapes the rhythm of your day long before sunlight touches the stone floors. The hall is cold, drafty, the chill seeping beneath heavy tapestries and into the soles of your feet. Outside, the village begins to stir. Smoke rises from chimneys, dogs bark at the edges of the fields, and the distant clatter of carts carries along the dirt lanes. Inside the manor, life unfolds with quiet insistence. Servants stir, drawing water from wells, lighting hearth fires, and preparing simple meals. The great hall is the center of daily activity, yet its size amplifies the monotony. Long tables, benches worn smooth by decades of use, and the pervasive scent of wood smoke and unwashed bodies. You notice every detail because survival and duty demand it. A crooked candle, a drafty doorway, a spilled bucket of water all require attention. You are part of the household staff, apprentice, servant, or laborer. Your tasks are repetitive but essential: sweeping floors, tending the hearth, fetching water, chopping wood, carrying meals, and assisting in the kitchen or storeroom. Each chore has a precise rhythm, yet the repetition is endless. There is no pause for reflection, no sudden excitement. Life within the manor is a slow grind, measured in chores, meals, and the movements of those in authority. The lady of the house or the steward oversees the household with meticulous attention. You learn quickly that obedience and attentiveness are not optional. Errors are met with reprimand, often quiet and pointed, sometimes more public depending on the severity. The hierarchy is strict. Laborers answer to stewards, stewards to the lady or lord, and all must navigate unspoken expectations. Social awareness is as necessary as physical skill. Your survival depends on knowing not only what to do, but when and how to do it. Meals are simple yet labor-intensive. Bread is baked in the kitchen, butter churned, ale brewed. You assist where needed, measuring ingredients, stirring cauldrons, or carrying heavy pots. The work is repetitive but vital. Hundreds of mouths depend on the smooth operation of the household. Even minor mistakes, a burnt loaf, a spilled pot of soup, ripple outward, affecting multiple lives. Mid-morning brings the first wave of deliveries and chores. Firewood stacked, water drawn, herbs gathered from the manor garden, laundry prepared. Your hands grow rough, your arms weary from lifting buckets and chopping wood. Dust and ash cling to clothing and skin. Yet in this repetitive labor, you gain a deep understanding of how the manor sustains itself, how careful organization and constant effort prevent chaos. You notice patterns invisible to outsiders. The timing of meals, the rotation of chores, the delivery of supplies, even the way servants move through the hall all follow an unspoken logic. It is rhythm, discipline, and endurance distilled into daily motion. Life at the manor is not glamorous. It is methodical, often dull, yet it ensures survival, security, and a degree of stability for those who depend on it. Children of the household move quietly, observing, learning. You watch them navigate social hierarchies, mimic the movements of adults, and gradually internalize rules of behavior. Even education here is mundane. reciting prayers, learning table manners, and memorizing the layout of the estate. The lessons are subtle, embedded in repetition and observation rather than in lectures or books. Afternoons are spent maintaining the manor itself. Floors are scrubbed, hearths replenished, rooms tidied. You notice details: a cracked beam, a loose hinge, a draft under the door. Repairs are ongoing, often minor yet essential. The manor is not a static place. It ages, wears, and decays unless constantly attended. Your labor is the hidden force that preserves it, day after day, unnoticed by those who reap its comfort. By evening, shadows stretch long across the hall. Candles are lit, meals are served, and the household settles into a quieter rhythm. You are exhausted, yet the work is far from complete. Laundry, meal preparation, cleaning, and tending fires will continue until the last light fades. Even sleep is measured, brief, and interrupted, for tomorrow demands the same steady diligence. As you sit by the hearth, fingers aching from labor, you reflect on the subtle power of routine. Life at the manor is mundane, repetitive, and at times tedious. Yet it is this same monotony that ensures order, sustenance, and survival. The steady rhythm of work, unseen and often unremarked, sustains not only the household but the entire surrounding community. And as you drift toward sleep, a quiet question settles in your mind. If history often celebrates kings, battles, and monumental events, what of the countless lives shaped and defined by endless repetition, unglamorous labor, and quiet endurance within the walls of manors, workshops, and homes? The day begins again before dawn. You wake to the faint glow of candlelight flickering along the cold stone walls, the hearth from the night before reduced to glowing embers. Outside, the village is silent except for the distant clatter of carts and the occasional crow of a rooster. Inside, the manor is already awake quietly, methodically, insistently. You resume your chores immediately. Water must be drawn from the well, firewood stacked, floors swept, and the hearth rekindled. The rhythm is repetitive but essential. Each motion is precise. A pail must be carried without spilling, ashes cleared without scattering embers, floors scrubbed without damaging the boards. The work seems trivial, almost invisible, yet it is the backbone of the household. Without this labor, the manor's daily life would collapse into chaos. The household hierarchy shapes every movement. Stewards supervise laborers, maids supervise the younger apprentices, cooks direct the kitchen. Every instruction carries authority. Mistakes are noted silently or corrected firmly. You learn that survival depends as much on understanding these hierarchies as it does on performing your tasks efficiently. Social awareness is a skill as necessary as physical endurance. The kitchen dominates much of the day. Loaves are prepared, butter churned, meat cooked, ale stirred and skimmed. You measure, mix, and transport ingredients repeatedly. Small errors, a too thin loaf, an oversalted stew, a poorly wrapped bundle create ripples that affect the household sustenance and the satisfaction of the lord or lady. Repetition is your teacher. Every day you perform the same actions, each time slightly better, slightly faster, slightly more precise. Meanwhile, the manor itself demands attention. Thatched roofs leak, beams warp, floors creak. You repair small damage before it worsens, maintain doors and windows, tend to gardens. The estate is a living system and you are its caretaker. The work is endless. No day truly ends, for maintenance and preparation for tomorrow are constant, cyclical obligations. Outside the manor, the village moves in quiet patterns. Farmers tend fields, merchants transport goods, animals are fed and guided to pastures. Your labor in the manor sustains these rhythms indirectly. Bread from the kitchen nourishes laborers. Clean water prevents illness, fire, and warmth enable work to continue. The connections are subtle, almost invisible, yet crucial. As the afternoon wears on, fatigue sets in. Your hands ache from scrubbing and lifting. Your back is stiff from bending and carrying. Dust and ash cling to clothing and skin, yet there is a subtle pride in the monotony. You understand processes and patterns that most of the village cannot see. You have control over the details that preserve life and order. Your labor may be unremarkable to outsiders, yet it is indispensable. Children of the household and village linger nearby, curious about the constant motion. You teach small lessons: how to carry water, how to sweep efficiently, how to respect tools and fires. Your instruction is practical, unglamorous, yet essential for survival. Knowledge passes silently from one day to the next, generation to generation. As evening approaches, the manor slows. Meals are served, fires maintained, candles lit. The rhythm continues, but with less urgency. You pause briefly by the hearth, hands tired, body exhausted. Reflection comes easily in these moments. The monotony that once seemed tedious now reveals itself as a structure. It sustains, orders, and protects life. Yet even with routine mastered, questions persist. The labor you perform, repeated endlessly, ensures the survival of the household and the village. The lord or lady may be praised in records. Festivals are celebrated, taxes collected, laws enacted. But your work, quiet, repetitive, essential, remains largely invisible. You begin to wonder, how many lives, past and future, are built upon the unnoticed labor of those who endure monotony with patience, skill, and quiet diligence? And as the final embers glow in the hearth and the manor settles for night, you ask yourself, if the grandeur of history is measured in kings and battles, how much of life and survival is shaped by the countless ordinary, repetitive acts that ensure the world continues smoothly, day after day? Night descends slowly over the manor. Candles flicker, casting shadows along stone walls and timber beams. The hallways are silent but for the occasional creak of settling wood or the distant clatter of a servant finishing a final chore. Outside, the village rests. The fields are quiet, the animals tucked into pens, the river flowing endlessly past the edges of the estate. You move through the manor one last time before resting, inspecting the fires, checking that doors are latched, that water barrels are filled, that leftovers from the evening meal are stored safely. Each small task, though unremarkable, ensures that the household survives another night. You see the subtle interdependence of life here. Your labor allows others to rest safely, eat reliably, and rise prepared for the next day. The weight of the day lingers in your muscles and bones. Hands are raw from scrubbing, lifting, and carrying. Your back aches from bending and hauling. Your mind hums with the rhythm of chores and the timing of tasks. And yet in this repetition, there is a strange sense of accomplishment. Each day, your efforts keep the household running. Each day, life continues without disaster. The monotony itself is a form of mastery, a mastery over disorder, chaos, and neglect. You pause in the great hall, looking around at tables and benches polished by centuries of use, at tapestries hanging slightly askew, at the hearth now quiet except for glowing embers. It is a space of continuity, sustained by countless hands like yours over years, decades, perhaps centuries. Your work is small, unremarked, yet it carries enormous weight. The health, comfort, and survival of everyone in the manor depends on it. Outside the manor windows, moonlight traces the edges of the fields, casting silver lines on the dirt paths where laborers, animals, and travelers move daily. You realize that survival is rarely the product of spectacle or heroism. It is the product of countless invisible, repetitive actions: fetching water, tending fires, preparing meals, sweeping floors, maintaining tools. The quiet, relentless labor of ordinary people ensures that life goes on. History may not remember their names, but without them, civilization itself falters. You settle into a modest bed, exhausted yet alert. The body relaxes while the mind reflects. You think of the village, the fields, the river, the workshops, and the mills. You recognize a pattern repeating across medieval life: endurance, repetition, observation, and constant attention to detail sustain human existence. Monotony is not merely tedium, it is survival. And yet as you drift toward sleep, one thought persists unresolvable. If kings, battles, and grand events dominate the stories we remember, what of the uncelebrated laborers whose daily repetition preserved life, order, and continuity for centuries? How many lives, villages, and communities were quietly shaped, sustained, and protected by hands that history forgot to note. Tomorrow the bells will toll again. The day will begin, chores will repeat, and life will continue steady, relentless, essential. Your work, invisible to most, endures just as it has for generations before you. Story 8: The Endless Row. Life as a Medieval Scribe. You wake before dawn, the chill of the stone chamber clinging to your back and hands. Outside, the monastery or scriptorium is quiet, though the distant crow of a rooster signals the beginning of another day. The air smells faintly of damp stone, candle smoke, and ink. Your desk is prepared. Sheets of parchment stacked neatly, quills trimmed and sharpened, ink pots filled with dark liquid, and your candle flickering softly. You are a scribe, tasked with copying texts by hand. Your world is one of quiet concentration, repetitive motions, and painstaking attention to detail. Each letter, each stroke, each dot must be precise. A single error can render a page unusable. The work is physically demanding. Your eyes strain, your fingers cramp, your back aches from hours bent over the desk. Yet this meticulous labor is essential. Without scribes, knowledge, religious, scientific, historical, cannot be preserved or transmitted. The day begins slowly. You examine the exemplar text before you, planning your movements. Each letter must mirror the original in shape, proportion, and spacing. Mistakes are corrected cautiously with scraping tools or small knives, each adjustment consuming precious time. The parchment is expensive, your quill delicate, and ink must be conserved. Waste is costly, precision is survival. As you begin, the world outside disappears. The faint sound of bells, distant conversations, and the flow of the river or courtyard life fade. Your focus narrows to quill, ink, and parchment. Hands move rhythmically, eye tracing, mind observing, heart steady. Repetition is constant. Letters, words, lines, and pages pass beneath your pen in an endless cycle. Lunch is brief: a small piece of bread, water, perhaps a bit of cheese. You eat quickly, mindful that time is precious. Your work continues without pause, the scriptorium a world unto itself. Monks or fellow scribes may move silently around you, carrying manuscripts or lighting candles. Your labor is invisible to most, yet indispensable. The texts you preserve today will inform generations to come, shaping knowledge and belief in ways few can anticipate. Hours pass. Fingers ache, eyes sting, and the repetitive motion of quill to parchment strains your body. Yet with each completed line comes satisfaction. The letters are uniform, legible, and beautiful. The act of creation is quiet, almost imperceptible, yet monumental in its consequences. You realize that history itself depends on this unglamorous persistence, on countless scribes whose hands traced words that shaped religion, law, science, and memory. Mistakes occur as they always do. A smudge of ink, a crooked line, an imperfect letter. Each must be corrected carefully without damaging the page. You learn patience, resilience, and humility. The work does not forgive carelessness, and yet it rewards diligence, attention, and endurance. By evening, candles are burning low, the scriptorium bathed in soft, flickering light. Completed pages are stacked carefully, ready to be bound or reviewed. The weight of your labor is tangible. Hundreds of words preserved, mistakes corrected, knowledge extended into the future. Your hands are blackened with ink, fingers stiff, eyes tired, yet a quiet pride persists. And as you sit back, stretching aching muscles, you ask yourself the first of many questions that accompany this life. How many centuries of knowledge, belief, and history exist today only because countless scribes performed monotonous, painstaking labor day after day, unnoticed, unsung, yet essential to the survival of human thought? The morning begins before sunrise once again, and you return to your desk, hands stiff from the previous day. Candlelight flickers across the room, highlighting the neat stacks of parchment and the carefully arranged ink pots. Outside, the monastery stirs faintly. The distant clatter of workmen, the low murmur of monks, the crow of roosters. Inside, the scriptorium is silent, save for the rhythmic scratching of quills across parchment. You begin the day with a ritual inspection. Quills must be trimmed to a precise point. Ink must be mixed to the correct consistency. Parchment sheets aligned for smooth copying. Small imperfections can ruin a page, so preparation is painstaking. The repetition seems endless, yet it is necessary. Order, discipline, and careful attention are as important as any intellectual ability. Your tasks are defined and unyielding. Copy a religious text, annotate it, illuminate a page with small flourishes. Hands ache as you bend over the desk, eyes burning from concentration and candlelight. Each word requires accuracy. A single misplaced letter or omitted line can change meaning, introduce confusion, or waste a precious page. The rhythm of work becomes meditative. Ink flows steadily, quills scratching against parchment in precise arcs and lines. Pages multiply slowly, each marking progress and endurance. Mistakes occur as always. Sometimes the ink blots, sometimes your hand slips, sometimes your eyes fatigue and letters distort. Correction is careful and deliberate. One careless motion can ruin hours of labor. Lunch is brief and functional. A bit of bread, some cheese, perhaps water or weak ale. Conversation is minimal, both to maintain concentration and because the work itself dominates life. Your body is tired, but the mind becomes sharper, attuned to subtle variations in stroke, spacing, and alignment. Each letter is a lesson in patience, precision, and self-discipline. Afternoon stretches on. The monotony of repetition does not dull your awareness, it hones it. You notice the faint wavering of a quill, the slightly uneven parchment, the subtle variations in ink thickness. Correcting these imperfections teaches vigilance and endurance. The life of a scribe is physically taxing but intellectually exacting. You are constantly balancing fine motor skill, mental focus, and awareness of errors before they accumulate into irreparable damage. Illumination of text adds another layer of labor. Gold leaf, delicate colors, and intricate designs require steady hands, patience, and careful timing. One misapplied brushstroke can ruin a page, yet perfection is expected. The work is both tedious and sacred. You are preserving knowledge, codifying tradition, and maintaining cultural memory. Evening approaches. Candlelight flickers against finished pages, casting shadows across the desk. The work is never truly complete. Tomorrow, the scriptorium will demand more. New texts to copy, annotations to make, corrections to perform. Your hands are stained with ink, muscles aching, eyes tired, yet there is satisfaction in the silent, steady progress. And as you lean back, exhausted yet focused, a question lingers. How much of human history exists only because countless scribes endured endless repetition, minute by minute, day after day, preserving knowledge in a world without type, printing, or machines? How many lessons, stories, and traditions would have been lost if not for their invisible, painstaking labor? Night finally descends over the scriptorium. Candles gutter and flicker along stone walls, casting long, wavering shadows across the tables stacked with sheets of parchment. The scratching of quills has ceased, and silence fills the room, broken only by the occasional settling of wood or the soft sigh of a draft. Outside, the world sleeps, but inside, the work of preservation rests only temporarily. You lean back from your desk, hands blackened with ink, fingers stiff, eyes strained from hours of careful concentration. The day's labor is complete, yet the work never truly ends. Tomorrow brings new texts, new pages, new lines to trace with painstaking precision. You have become part of a long continuum of scribes whose days are measured not in triumph or spectacle, but in the subtle endurance of small, repetitive acts. Looking over the pages you have completed, you notice tiny imperfections. A smudge of ink here, a slightly crooked letter there. You are aware of them because you care, because diligence is the only measure of value in your work. Each imperfection reminds you of the fragility of human knowledge. A small error can cascade, mislead, or distort understanding. And yet the effort persists, cumulative and persistent, spanning hours, days, and generations. Your labor has impact far beyond the scriptorium walls. Religious communities, scholars, and students will rely on these texts for guidance, instruction, and continuity. Even ordinary villagers, though unaware, are affected indirectly. The preservation of law, faith, and knowledge sustains social order, moral teaching, and cultural memory. Your hands, though unseen in history's grand narratives, are the ones bridging past and future. Fatigue weighs on your body, yet your mind remains alert, reflecting on the monotony that shapes mastery. Hours of repetition have taught you endurance, patience, and humility. You understand the importance of every small action, the trimming of a quill, the careful alignment of a line, the cautious correction of a mistake. These details, seemingly insignificant, hold the power to transmit knowledge across decades and centuries. Outside, moonlight glimmers faintly on the stone walls of the monastery. The river murmurs in the distance. You realize that life depends not on grand gestures alone, but on countless invisible, painstaking acts performed quietly day after day. History itself is built as much on these repetitive, unseen efforts as it is on battles, laws, or declarations. As you close the scriptorium for the night, one final thought lingers. If the stories we remember glorify kings, wars, and monumental events, how many centuries of knowledge, faith, and culture exist only because countless scribes endured the relentless repetition of labor, unnoticed and uncelebrated, preserving the memory of humanity one painstaking stroke at a time? You blow out your candle. Darkness fills the room. The work will resume at dawn, just as it has for generations. And you, like countless others before you, will continue to trace the lines of history with steady hands, patient mind, and unyielding diligence. Story 9. The relentless grind of the blacksmith, iron, fire, and sweat. You wake before the first glimmer of sunlight, already aware that the day will be long and punishing. The forge awaits, a pit of glowing coals and roaring fire, the smell of burning charcoal thick in the air. Outside, the village is still, silent but for the occasional crow of a rooster or the faint rush of water from a nearby stream. Inside, the workshop is alive with potential, a crucible where raw metal will be transformed into tools, hardware, and implements that sustain everyday life. You are an apprentice or perhaps the master smith, but regardless of title, your labor will define the day. Your hands are already calloused from previous work, your forearms thickened by repeated hammering. You dress in heavy leather apron and gloves, tunic and hose thick enough to resist sparks, yet flexible enough to allow precise movement. Every tool, every bellows, every anvil is carefully arranged, each with a place and purpose. Disorganization here is dangerous. A misplaced hammer or glowing coal can injure you or destroy hours of effort. The fire is stoked first. You feel the heat lick your face, smell the sharp tang of smoke and iron. The forge is temperamental. Too hot and metal will warp, too cool and it won't bend. You adjust the bellows, measure the air, feed the coals with care. The rhythm of the fire is the rhythm of life in this workshop. It demands attention, respect, and constant adjustment. Early morning tasks are repetitive but critical. Iron bars must be cleaned of scale, shaped roughly with tongs and brought to a uniform temperature. Sparks fly and your skin tingles with the ever-present risk of burns. Sweat forms quickly, dripping down your back and mixing with the smell of smoke and oil. Every motion is deliberate. A hammer strike, a twist of tongs, a careful application of pressure. Mistakes are costly, often immediately so. A misjudged swing can scar metal, break a tool, or injure yourself. Villagers arrive with orders. Horseshoes, nails, hinges, cooking implements, and tools for the fields are all requested. Each is important. The livelihood of the village depends on your skill. A mise-forged plowshare can ruin a season's planting. A poorly made hinge can collapse a door or gate. Your labor is not glamorous. It is essential. Without it, daily life would falter, slowly and painfully. The rhythm of the workshop is relentless. Metal must be heated, hammered, cooled, sharpened, and shaped again. You repeat these motions for hours, developing muscle memory, endurance, and precision. Pain and fatigue become constant companions, yet they are tolerated because survival demands it. You learn to observe subtle cues in the metal, a slight change in color, a faint warping, a shift in resistance under the hammer. These small observations determine success or failure. Midday brings a brief reprieve. A simple meal, a piece of bread, perhaps cheese and water or weak ale. Conversation is minimal, the work will not wait. Even the master's attention is focused on production, correcting only when errors occur or instruction is necessary. Apprentices observe silently, learning not through lectures but through careful watching, imitation, and repeated trial. Knowledge in the smithy is passed hand to hand, muscle to muscle, over the course of years. Afternoons are long and punishing. Sparks burn, coals smoke, and metal resists bending as your body fatigues. Yet in this repetition, a rhythm emerges, a harmony between fire, hammer, and stone. Each strike is measured, each motion deliberate. Skill is embedded not in theory, but in the quiet mastery of repetition. Evening approaches. The fire is banked for the night, tools are cleaned, and orders are stacked for inspection. You step outside, muscles sore, clothing smudged with soot, hair singed. The village moves into evening routine. Livestock secured, hearth fires lit, meals prepared. Your labor has ensured that these routines continue unhindered. You realize that history and survival alike rely on these small, repetitive acts of uncelebrated labor. And as you pause by the forge, sweat-streaked and tired, a question rises quietly in your mind. If the world depends so heavily on unrelenting, meticulous work, how many lives and communities have been sustained by those whose effort is never recorded, whose sweat and skill quietly shaped survival without recognition? Dawn breaks again and you return to the forge. The coals are still glowing faintly from yesterday, a promise that the work will resume without delay. You feed the fire, adjust the bellows, and prepare tools for the relentless rhythm ahead. Your body aches from the previous day, but the work demands presence. Metal will not wait, mistakes cannot be undone, and survival depends on precision, endurance, and observation. The morning begins with repetitive tasks. Heating bars of iron, hammering them into shape, quenching them in water or oil, and repeating the process. Sparks fly with every strike, tiny flames dancing briefly before fatting. Your skin tingles, your hands blister, your back stiffens. Yet this repetition is not meaningless. Every motion refines skill, develops muscle memory, and teaches subtle lessons about heat, pressure, and resistance. You learn to anticipate how the iron will behave, how it will bend, and when it will break. Orders continue to arrive from the village. Nails, horseshoes, cooking implements, locks, hinges, plowshares, each task is different, yet each requires the same attention to detail. Failure carries real consequences. A bent plowshare can ruin crops, a broken hinge can collapse a door, a poorly forged knife can injure the user. Your labor directly sustains daily life, often without acknowledgement. Apprentices or helpers move silently beside you, learning by observation. They watch the angle of your hammer, the timing of your strikes, the rhythm of heating and cooling. Knowledge is transmitted silently, through repetition and imitation rather than instruction. Every task, no matter how menial, contributes to a growing understanding of the craft and its vital role in the community. By midday, your body is drenched in sweat, the heat oppressive. The forge radiates warmth, smoke curls through the air, and the smell of burning charcoal mixes with iron. You pause briefly for sustenance, bread, cheese, water, or ale, eaten quickly. Conversation is minimal. The fire, the hammer, and the iron require full attention. Fatigue is constant, yet your awareness remains sharp. The afternoon brings more demanding tasks. You forge delicate items, hinges, locks, and tools that require both precision and strength. One slip, one uneven strike, and hours of work could be ruined. Yet within this challenge lies a subtle satisfaction. Each successful piece is a tangible outcome of skill, patience, and endurance. You see the immediate impact of your labor, yet it also connects to broader consequences. The villagers' survival, the maintenance of their tools, the productivity of their fields. Evening descends. The last pieces of iron are shaped, cooled, and stored. Sparks settle, coals dim, and tools are cleaned and arranged for the next day. Your body is exhausted, muscles sore, hands blistered and blackened with soot. Yet there is pride in the endurance, the precision, and the knowledge that your labor sustains life beyond the forge. Standing outside, you watch the village lights flicker in the distance. Life continues because of the invisible, repetitive work you performed. Meals will be cooked, doors secured, livestock tended, fields plowed. The forge is silent now, but its influence extends far into the community. You recognize a pattern in medieval survival. The small, uncelebrated efforts of laborers underpin society, creating the conditions for life to continue steadily, predictably, and safely. And as night deepens, one thought persists. If history remembers only kings, battles, and monumental feats, what of the countless hours of sweat, repetition, and skill that shaped life itself? How many villages, crops, and families have endured because of hands like yours, whose labor is essential yet invisible? Night falls over the village and the forge is finally quiet. The coals glow faintly, fatting to embers while smoke curls lazily into the darkened sky. The workshop smells of iron, ash, and sweat, a pungent reminder of the day's labor. Your hands are blackened, blistered, stiff from hours of striking hot metal. Your back aches, your arms feel leaden, and your muscles throb with exhaustion. Yet in this fatigue there is a strange satisfaction. You have survived the day and your work has shaped survival itself. You move through the workshop, checking that tools are arranged properly, that the bellows are prepared for tomorrow, that iron bars and finished items are stored safely. Even in rest, the forge requires attention. One overlooked ember can spark disaster. One misplaced tool can slow work. One neglected bar can rust. The blacksmith's labor never truly ends. It is continuous, cyclical, and indispensable. Looking over the day's output, you see tangible evidence of effort. Nails, hinges, horseshoes, plowshares, cooking tools, all products of repetition, skill, and endurance. These items will support countless daily lives, often without acknowledgement. Villagers will rely on them without considering the hours of heat, sweat, and precision that went into their creation. Yet the importance of this labor is undeniable. Without it, fields could not be plowed, doors could not close, bread could not be baked, and the village would slowly falter. Even as the work is invisible to most, its consequences ripple outward. Every tool, every horseshoe, every hinge contributes to the continuity of life. You realize that survival in medieval times does not come from single heroic acts or grand events, but from countless small, disciplined actions carried out repeatedly, day after day. The blacksmith, the miller, the scribe, and the laborer form an invisible network that sustains life. Fatigue weighs on your body, but your mind reflects on the lessons learned. Endurance, patience, observation, and precision. You understand the importance of repetition. It is not monotony, but mastery. Each strike, each adjustment, each careful alignment builds competence, resilience, and reliability. History may not remember the blacksmith, yet the world depends on him as much as it depends on rulers and battles. Stepping outside into the cool night, you see the village settled for the evening. Fires burning softly in homes, smoke rising from chimneys, the distant murmur of livestock in pens. Life continues because of the labor you and countless others perform quietly and consistently. Your effort is a foundation, invisible yet essential, shaping the rhythms of survival and society itself. And as you finally lay down to rest, one thought remains, persistent and unresolvable. If history remembers the grand and the celebrated, what of the countless lives sustained by invisible labor, the tireless, repetitive, precise work of blacksmiths, millers, scribes, and artisans, whose endurance, skill, and sweat built the very foundation of medieval life? The forge will awaken at dawn. You will awaken with it, and the cycle of heat, hammer, and iron will continue, shaping life in ways both seen and unseen, enduring across generations. Story 10. The silent suffering of the plague years. Daily life in a medieval town. You wake to an empty street. The usual bustle of vendors, carts, and villagers is absent. Smoke still rises from a few chimneys, but the air is heavy with silence, as though the town itself is holding its breath. The plague has arrived, or more accurately, it has been here for weeks, spreading invisibly, relentlessly, through the narrow streets, crowded homes, and market stalls. Every face you see carries suspicion, fear, or grief. Survival is uncertain. Normal routines are fractured, and every small action carries a weight you have never felt before. You are a townsman, perhaps a merchant, an apprentice, a laborer, or a servant. Your daily rhythm has changed. Streets are deserted, trade is limited, and each encounter with a neighbor or traveler is measured with caution. The plague does not distinguish rank, wealth, or occupation. It is indiscriminate, leaving both peasants and merchants vulnerable. Even the rich, once confident in their isolation, find that walls and money offer only temporary protection. Your morning begins with careful inspection of your home or workshop. Doors are latched, food is rationed, and water is boiled or otherwise treated if possible. The town's market is largely empty. Those who venture out do so with masks of cloth or face coverings soaked in vinegar, seeking to protect themselves from invisible miasmas. Merchants whisper about shortages. Grain, flour, and ale are harder to obtain. Trade is slowed by fear and death. The streets are paradoxically both silent and unsettling. Animals wander, abandoned carts creak in the wind, and the occasional bell tolls for a neighbor lost. You move cautiously, noting every cough, every pallor, every sign of sickness. Neighbors once friendly are now avoided. Doors remain closed, windows shuttered. Even simple social rituals, greetings, conversation, communal work have been suspended, leaving an eerie solitude over the town. You tend to your duties with careful attention. If you are a tradesman, you maintain essential work, baking, smithing, milling, or basic repairs. Each task is fraught with risk. A single misstep could expose you to disease. The repetitive rhythms of your work, the kneading of dough, the hammering of metal, the grinding of grain, feel both grounding and absurd. These tasks are lifelines, anchoring the fragile continuity of daily life in a town teetering on the edge of collapse. Hunger becomes a concern. Supplies dwindle as transport routes falter. You ration food carefully, sometimes consuming only what is essential for survival. Each meal carries the weight of uncertainty. Will there be bread tomorrow, or will famine join the plague as a silent killer? Every bite is both nourishment and anxiety, a reminder of the precariousness of life. Children, if they remain, are watched closely. Their play is muted, their laughter rare. Education is suspended, teachers gone, and survival lessons take precedence over learning to read or write. Youthful curiosity is constrained by necessity. Even innocence is measured, rationed, disciplined by fear. By midday, the sun rises over the empty square. You notice neighbors moving cautiously, hidden behind curtains or masks. The smell of smoke, decay, and unwashed streets is omnipresent. You begin to see the patterns of survival. Avoid contact, maintain hygiene as best you can, conserve resources, and rely on small networks of trusted individuals. Every decision carries moral and physical weight. Whether to help a sick neighbor, whether to trade essential goods, whether to risk your own life for the sake of another. Evenings are quieter, heavier. Candlelight illuminates your home, highlighting dust, rationed food, and empty streets outside. Each night brings uncertainty. Who will survive? Who will succumb? The repetition of chores, cooking, cleaning, fetching water is now also a form of defense, a ritual against chaos. Daily life persists, but it is never ordinary. Fear has become the constant backdrop, shaping each decision, each movement, each interaction. And as you lay down to rest, you realize that this life, so familiar yet transformed, raises a haunting question. If the rhythms of ordinary life can be shattered so completely by disease, how much of history, our understanding of communities, trade, and survival is defined not by wars or kings, but by the invisible, relentless pressure of illness and mortality? The morning light struggles to penetrate the thick, smoky haze of the town. Streets are nearly deserted, carts sit abandoned, stalls empty, and the usual calls of vendors have been replaced by silence. The plague has created a world where every interaction is measured, every movement weighed for risk. Survival is no longer about productivity or prosperity, it is about avoidance, endurance, and careful observation. You begin the day with familiar chores, though each now carries heightened significance. Water is drawn cautiously from wells, inspected for contamination. Food is prepared with extra care, washed, boiled, or baked to reduce the chance of sickness. Hygiene, once a mundane concern, is now essential to life itself. Dust, dirt, and waste are enemies. Careful attention to cleanliness is a daily ritual of survival. Work, if it continues at all, is slower and more deliberate. Trades such as baking, blacksmithing, and milling continue only to meet essential needs. You handle each task with caution, avoiding contact with others when possible. A customer may be a neighbor or a carrier of disease. The mental burden of constant vigilance is exhausting. Every cough, every fevered face, every pale hand carries potential threat. Each moment requires calculation, how to act without endangering yourself or others. The village itself is transformed. Buildings fall into disrepair as regular maintenance halts. Livestock roam unchecked, food stores dwindle, and social gatherings vanish. Fear shapes behavior more than reason. People avoid each other not out of malice but out of necessity. Trust is scarce, and isolation becomes both protector and punishment. The rhythm of the day is dictated not by commerce or social ritual, but by survival and caution. Children are especially vulnerable. They wander less, play quietly, and absorb the anxiety of the adults around them. Education is halted, replaced by lessons in vigilance. Do not touch, do not share, do not expose. The innocence of youth is compressed into observation, imitation, and fear. Yet even amidst terror, small acts of human resilience appear. A neighbor leaves bread for another. A hidden garden produces food. A discreet message conveys instructions for survival. These gestures are quiet, almost imperceptible, yet vital. By midday, exhaustion sets in. The work of daily survival is unrelenting, compounded by the mental strain of vigilance. Your hands, eyes, and mind ache from the dual demands of labor and fear. Yet in this monotony lies subtle continuity. Baking, sweeping, fetching water, repairing what can be repaired, these acts maintain a fragile semblance of life, keeping the town from complete collapse. Even the passage of time becomes distorted. Days blend together, punctuated only by bell tolls marking deaths or the absence of previously familiar voices. Familiar routines, preparing meals, tending animals, cleaning streets, become acts of resistance against chaos. You notice that survival depends not on strength, skill, or wealth alone, but on endurance, vigilance, and adaptability. Those who persevere do so quietly, often unnoticed, shaping the persistence of community through repetition and care. As evening falls, the town becomes even more eerie. Candles flicker in shuttered windows. The occasional bell tolls a death. Smoke curls from lonely chimneys. The silence is thick, punctuated only by the occasional cough or the distant cry of grief. Inside your home, the repetitive chores, cleaning, cooking, preparing for the next day, become rituals of control in a world otherwise defined by uncertainty. And as you rest, tired from both labor and fear, one question lingers. If the survival of entire communities depended on quiet endurance, meticulous hygiene, and constant vigilance, how many stories of resilience, adaptation, and unseen heroism have been erased by history, overshadowed by the spectacle of plague and death? Night descends over the town like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The streets are empty, lanterns unlit, and the distant toll of bells marks lives lost. The plague has left silence in its wake, but the daily rhythm of survival continues for those who remain. Inside your home, the hearth flickers weakly, illuminating the careful stacks of food, the cleaned floors, and the sanitized surfaces that have become lifelines. Your hands are tired from constant labor preparing meals, boiling water, cleaning, and caring for those who are sick. Your body aches from exhaustion, and your mind is burdened by worry. Who will survive the night? who will fall ill tomorrow, and what measures must be taken to protect yourself and others. Every day is a delicate balance between action and caution, labor and rest, vigilance and despair. You reflect on the quiet heroism of daily endurance. Survival does not come from dramatic acts, but from repeated, unremarkable tasks performed with care. Washing hands, avoiding contact, preparing food carefully, tending the sick. Every measured movement, every ritualized task is a thread holding the fabric of the town together. These are acts of persistence and resilience, largely invisible, yet they determine whether families endure or perish. Children, if present, are kept close. Their laughter is muted, replaced by cautious observation. They witness survival as a series of small, deliberate choices: where to go, whom to touch, what to eat. In this way, knowledge and caution are transmitted quietly, unspoken but critical for life. Generations learn through repetition and observation rather than books or instruction. You glance outside at the deserted streets, the shuttered windows, the abandoned carts. Even in fear and death, life persists. People continue to work where they can, tend animals, protect supplies, and preserve the fragile structure of community. Each act, though small and repetitive, has enormous consequences. You realize that history is not only made in battles or treaties, but in these invisible acts of endurance performed in kitchens, workshops, and homes. Fatigue and anxiety weigh heavily, yet there is a certain clarity in monotony. Life has been reduced to essentials: eat, clean, protect, and endure. Every repetitive motion carries meaning, ensuring that tomorrow will arrive and that you and your community will remain. The plague has stripped life to its fundamentals, revealing how survival relies on unnoticed labor and constant vigilance. And as sleep finally overtakes you, a persistent thought lingers. If history is often written in terms of catastrophe, kings, and armies, how many generations endured and adapted through quiet, uncelebrated labor, ensuring that life continued even in the shadow of disease, famine, and fear? How much of human history owes its survival to the invisible rhythm of ordinary lives carefully preserved? The town sleeps uneasily. Tomorrow the cycle begins again: chores, vigilance, care, and quiet endurance. The plague will not pause, yet life persists, carried forward by the invisible acts of those who refuse to yield to fear.